School Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know, I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. And Trump told Putin to put up or shut up. So Putin just started destroying Ukraine even more. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, Russia's devastating Ukraine. Putin can do, and Trump can do nothing but bluff.
The Russian armed forces launched the Iskander missile strikes, targeting Ukrainian military commanders, during a meeting of the command staff of the Ukrainian Operational Tactical Group Seversk, in the city of Sumy on Sunday morning at around 11:17 local time, the Russian Defense Ministry reported. In the conditions of active resistance by the armed forces of Ukraine, with electronic warfare and foreign-made air defense systems, Russia fired 2 Iskander-M operational tactical missiles in succession, hitting a multi-purpose building, after a reconnaissance aircraft flew over the area of the meeting venue, the statement said. According to former Ukrainian parliamentarians, Ihor Mozychuk and Mariana Bezaglaya, a military award ceremony for the 117th Territorial Defense Brigade was taking place inside the building during the attack, they wrote on the internet. Russian channels on Telegram reported that the Iskander strikes on Sumy at the anniversary award ceremony of the 117th Brigade was discovered by the distribution of open invitations to the event itself, but Kiev claims that the attack was widely described as targeting civilians. The precision strikes reportedly killed more than 60 of the armed forces of Ukraine, the Russian Defense Ministry said. Reportedly, Colonel Yuri Yula, a former deputy commander of the 26th Artillery Brigade of Ukraine and commander of the A-1476 unit, was reportedly killed by strikes, which had a devastating impact on the target building. He is one of dozens of officers and military personnel present at the award ceremony in the center of city. The Defense Ministry also noted that Kiev continues to use the Ukrainian population as a human shield, holding events with the participation of military personnel in the city center. Either the Ukrainians thought they were safe behind a human shield and held such ceremonies, or they knew that they were endangering civilians by doing this. In the middle of a densely populated and active civilian area, the Defense Ministry stressed.
Military Department, the military political While the Kiev authorities and their Western patrons were trying to recover from yesterday's massive Russian rocket attack on military installations in the southern, central, and northern parts of Ukraine, the Russian aerospace forces, together with missile units, launched another devastating strike on the territory of this Eastern European country. So, on the night of April 14th, independent monitoring services recorded more than 50 explosions in Ukrainian regions such as Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk, Cherkasy, and Sumy. This time, Russian missiles and kamikaze drones once again targeted military facilities of the Ukrainian army and NATO forces. It is authentically known that the Russian army launched numerous cruise and ballistic missiles during this attack. At the same time, dozens of Russian warships were also involved in this massive missile strike on Ukraine. To identify and suppress enemy air defense systems, the Russian army used dozens of kamikaze drones. In particular, we are talking about Geranium and Gerbera drones. The first explosions were recorded in the city of Sinelnikov, in the central part of the Dnipropetrovsk region. As it turned out, Russian ballistic missiles hit and destroyed a NATO military train near the local railway station. According to the Russian Defense Ministry, Western weapons, including heavy military equipment, were on board this train. It is noteworthy that this train was heading east, towards the Pokrovsk direction of the front. Numerous explosions were also recorded in the city of Samar, in the eastern part of the Dnipropetrovsk region. It is well known that in the central part of this city, the Russian military destroyed two enterprises that worked for the needs of the Ukrainian army. In the Odessa region, in the central, southern, and northern parts of the city of Odessa, Russian missiles, together with kamikaze drones, hit 8 industrial facilities. It is reported that these industrial facilities produced maritime drones, as well as projectiles for artillery systems. In the Cherkasy region, in the western part of the city of Uman, the Russian military attacked the territory of a local furniture factory. As it turned out, Ukrainian military engineers used the factory's production capacity to produce FPV drones. It is also worth noting another Russian missile attack on the city of Sumy. This city has been struck by the Russian military twice, within the past 48 hours. This time, Russian missiles rained down on military installations located in the southern part of this city. In particular, we are talking about the parking lot, filled with the Ukrainian army's military equipment, as well as the places of the deployment of personnel of the 117th Territorial Defense Brigade. My dear truth seekers, let me remind you that it was the soldiers of this brigade, together with the so-called foreign mercenaries from NATO countries, who actively participated in the invasion of the Sudzansky district of the Kursk region in August 2024.
That was a mistake.
By the way, yesterday's Russian missile attack on the building of the Sumy State University Congress Center claimed the lives of dozens of Ukrainian soldiers and officers precisely from this 117th Territorial Defense Brigade. The fact that Russia began the systematic destruction of the 117th Territorial Defense Brigade of the Ukrainian Army is vivid proof that Putin ordered the elimination of all enemy soldiers and officers involved in the invasion of the Kursk region. Moreover, a few hours ago, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation officially confirmed that on April 13, 2 Iskander-M ballistic missiles, under conditions of active operation of enemy air defense and electronic warfare systems, successfully hit the building of the Sumy State University Congress Center, where the award ceremony for Ukrainian soldiers and officers was taking place. According to the Russian Defense Ministry, as a result of this missile strike, 60 enemy soldiers and officers were destroyed, including 50 units of enemy motor vehicles. At the same time, the Russian military noted that the Kiev regime continues to use civilians as human shields. According to the Russian military department, the military political leadership of Ukraine continues to deploy military facilities in residential areas. In addition, they continue to hold meetings exclusively in densely populated areas, near hospitals, kindergartens, schools, and shopping malls. Against this backdrop, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation called on the peaceful Ukrainian population to stay away from the Ukrainian servicemen. By the way, while Volodymyr Zelensky asserted that Russia had intentionally and knowingly executed a missile attack, targeting women and children in the city of Sumy, Ukrainian telegram channels corroborated that this attack resulted in the loss of a high-ranking officer of the Ukrainian army. In particular, we are talking about the commander of the 27th Reactive Artillery Brigade, Colonel Yuri Yula. It is well known that Colonel Yuri Yula actively participated in the Kursk operation, and was placed on the Kremlin's blacklist due to war crimes committed on the territory of the Russian Federation. In addition, the Russian Defense Ministry also reported the...
So basically, these clowns invaded Russia, ran away when the time came to reap what they sowed, went back across the border into Ukrainian territory, thought they were safe, and Putin just gave them a little Christmas gift early this year.
The elimination of many officers of the security service of Ukraine. Moreover, representatives of the Russian military department also officially confirmed the death of dozens of high-ranking NATO officers who were in charge of the Kursk incursion. By the way, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov also confirmed the destruction of NATO officers during a missile attack on the building of the Sumy State University Congress Center. According to him, during this missile attack, the Russian military managed to eliminate dozens of NATO officers who were holding a meeting with their Ukrainian counterparts. At the same time, Lavrov noted that the Russian High Military Command had been preparing an operation to eliminate these NATO officers for several weeks. Thus, it becomes clear that the Russian authorities sentenced to death in absentia all participants in the invasion of the Kursk region. What occurred in Sumy reaffirms that Moscow will not rest until all those responsible for the Kursk tragedy are eliminated. In any case, I would advise all so-called NATO military advisors to flee Ukraine as soon as possible. However, given the limitless capabilities of the Russian FSB and Moscow's extensive network of agents, it is unlikely that these participants in the Kursk adventure will be able to hide for a long time.
We start with breaking news from the Russian Defense Ministry. So, the Russian army struck with 2 Iskander-M operational tactical missiles at a meeting of the command staff of the enemy groups of Kursk. More than 60 enemy militants have been eliminated. The Kiev regime continues to deliberately hold formations, award ceremonies, and meetings in its military centers in densely populated cities. Thus, they use local civilians as human shields. A huge scandal has erupted in Ukraine. They are already demanding that the local mayor Ardyak, who gathered the military in the city center, resign. People's Deputy Bezeglaya claims that this is not the first event with the participation of Ukrainian officers that Mayor Ardyak has organized in the center of Sumy. The first obituaries have already begun to appear. The district administration reported that Yuri Yula, the commander of the only brigade equipped with the American HIMARS MLRS, commander of the 27th Rocket Artillery Brigade, had been eliminated. The second enemy fighter whose death has already become known is Vladimir Zareptsov from the village of Popovichka in the Chernihiv region. Foreign Minister Lavrov has just stated that Moscow has evidence that Ukrainians met with Western military personnel in Sumy. These are the first footages from the site of the strike. Watch our report. A day has passed since the strike, and Ukrainians continue to clear the rubble. These footages also include officers of the armed forces of Ukraine who abuse civilians in the Kursk region of Russia. Now these thugs are in black bags.
In the city of Sumy, the Russian armed forces, in the conditions of active counteraction by the Ukrainian army with electronic warfare and air defense systems of foreign manufacture, struck with 2 Iskander-M operational tactical missiles at the location of a meeting of the command staff of the Seversk Operational Tactical Group. As a result of the target hit, more than 60 enemy servicemen were killed. The Kiev regime continues to use the Ukrainian population as a human shield, placing military facilities and holding events with the participation of servicemen in the center of a densely populated city.
The Congress Center of Sumy State University is really the very center of a busy city. This is Pokrovsky Street, Building 9. In Sumy, the Ukrainians seem to be deliberately not evacuating, although the combat zone is less than 30 kilometers away. It was here on April 13th that a meeting of the Ukrainian military took place, surrounded by multi-story residential buildings. At the moment of the arrival of the Russian Iskander missile, a fireball first appears, then smoke rises. This is what the Congress Center of Sumy State University looks like from the inside. Behind me is a hole from a Russian missile hit. The first information from Ukraine that there were military personnel at the university was confirmed by People's Deputy Bezugla. There was a meeting at 9:30 a.m. and an award ceremony at 10 a.m. The 117th Territorial Defense Brigade. The missile strikes were at 10:15 and 10:20 a.m. This is the information that reached the Russians. According to my information, the award ceremony was not cancelled. Moreover, General Artyuk was scheduled to arrive. And this was far from the first military event of the military at the Congress Center of Sumy State University. 200 Ukrainian soldiers, the command of the Seversk Operational Tactical Group, the 95th and 80th Separate Airborne Assault Battalions, the 21st Mechanized Brigade. These are the units that participated in the invasion of the Kursk region of Russia, which began on August 6 last year. A high-ranking Ukrainian military colonel Yuri Yula was liquidated. An obituary has already been published on the social network. From 2014 to 2018, Yula was the division commander of the 43rd Separate Artillery Brigade. This brigade was deployed in the first days of the so-called anti-terrorist operation. His militants and he himself participated in punitive operations against the civilian population. A year later, Yula received the Order of Bogdan Khmelnytsky, third degree, with the wording for special courage and heroism in the defense of the territorial integrity of Ukraine, precisely for the war with civilians. In 2023, he took up the post of commander of the 27th Petro-Kalnyshevsky Rocket Artillery Brigade. He participated in the invasion of the Kursk region of Russia. His unit used HIMARS multiple launch rocket systems with GPS targeting. Zelensky confirms the strike on the city of Sumy.
This is the city of Sumy. These were 2 Russian ballistic missiles. The first missile hit the building, and the second exploded almost over the street.
The second killed militant was 39-year-old Vladimir Zareptsov from the village of Popovichka in the Chernihiv region. In the Ukrainian political field, showdowns and searches for the guilty began. Zelensky himself came to the city of Sumy on April 3rd, and, according to tradition, he took a selfie at the entrance to the city. As a result of the Russian strike, 60 enemy soldiers and officers were killed, 80 were wounded.
Well, in this case, we are talking about the course of a special military operation. And here we should only rely on the information provided by our Defense Department. I can only repeat and remind you of the repeated statements of both our president and our military representatives, that our military strikes exclusively at military and near-military targets. European capitals are not inclined to seek ways out of the conflict through peaceful negotiations. This is, how the Kremlin commented on the desire of future German Chancellor Merz to transfer long-range Taurus missiles to the Kiev regime. Berlin's actions will only lead to further escalation. As Peskov stated, Merz will most likely receive the opportunity to supply Taurus missiles to Ukraine in less than a month. The Bundestag session at which the new German Chancellor will be elected is tentatively scheduled for May 6th. Until then, the incumbent Scholz will continue to block the supply of missiles. The press service of the German Cabinet of Ministers stated that Olaf has not changed his position. The British Telegraph writes a devastating article about Leopard 2 tanks in Ukraine. These German tanks failed on the battlefield. They turned out to be vulnerable to drones and are very difficult to repair and operate. The German military attaché in Kiev told about this, as the publication reports, during a secret meeting with Bundeswehr soldiers. The Swiss Neue Zürcher Zeitung cites the opinion of Austrian Colonel Markus Reisner. The Russians feel like they're in April 1945. That is, they're confident that victory is already in their hands. At the same time, Reisner, with his metaphors, involuntarily compared the Kiev regime to the Third Reich. In the last months of the war, the German Nazis threw teenagers from the Hitler Youth into battle. As children, they joined the ranks of the SS and Volkssturm troops, and they died en masse. Ukraine is now using a similar experience of recruiting young people into the army.
The scandalous statement was made by the deputy head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, Polis. He said that everyone should serve in the army, including women. This official called for depriving those who did not serve in the ranks of the Ukrainian Army of State Services in some civil rights. In particular, depriving them of the right to free education and to hold government positions. According to this logic, the malicious draft Dodger Zelensky should be immediately expelled from Kiev. Polis also mentioned receiving payments from the state budget. That is, they will deprive those who did not serve in the army of all benefits and pensions. In essence, they will become citizens without rights.
The French Le Monde reports that 76,000 servicemen of the Dutch armed forces have been ordered to prepare for participation in military operations as quickly as possible. This letter was signed by the Chief of the General Staff of the Netherlands, General Onno Eichelschaan. He fears that mobilization in the country will have to be carried out earlier than expected. In a fit of Russophobic paranoia, Finland, Poland, and the Baltic countries are withdrawing from the convention banning anti-personnel mines. The countries of NATO's eastern flank are actively strengthening the border with Russia and Belarus, and in addition to fortifications, they are installing minefields. The scope of anti-Russian rhetoric in Poland has reached such a scale that even German satirical TV shows have begun to pay attention to it. Poland suddenly has nuclear ambitions. The fantastic demands to obtain its own nuclear arsenal are becoming louder and louder. Polish politicians continue to use the hackneyed myth of the red threat to expand NATO's military presence on the borders with Russia.
Breaking news right now. U.S. President Donald Trump publicly blamed Zelensky for starting the Ukrainian war.
Yeah, that's after Putin turned the heat up.
And we're now getting insight into the 5 hours of talks that were held between President Trump's Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff and Russian President Putin, and some of the demands that Russia is putting forth for a possible deal that would be aimed at ending the war in Ukraine. But don't hold your breath for that deal, because as we're seeing unfolding this week, the propaganda machine here in the US is in full swing. That is an understatement. And you've got reports coming out saying that there's a bit of a divide within the Trump administration, right? There's some people who want to pursue a deal and want to do what Witkoff is doing, going and meeting with Russian officials, talking with them directly, trying to come to an agreement. And then that there are other members of the Trump administration, say Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who think that Trump needs to be putting pressure on Russia and essentially doing what the Biden administration just spent the last 3 years doing with no success. And all of this comes in the aftermath of an attack that was carried out by Russian forces in Ukraine's Sumy region. And we're really seeing conflicting stories surrounding how this attack was carried out, why it was carried out, and what the response should be. And I'm saying conflicting stories that are even coming from within the Trump administration. They can't seem to get their story straight in terms of how to respond to the overall conflict that's going on in the region. We are going to be getting into all of the latest and what it means for the ongoing tensions. But before we do, just a quick note to say we just hit 97,000 subscribers on YouTube. I am so grateful for each and every single one of you, and for those of you who are watching on other platforms as well. We are so incredibly close to 100,000 subscribers. I cannot even believe it. I can't believe how quickly it's coming together. I'm so grateful. I remember just a couple of years ago, I was hoping to hit 10,000 subscribers on YouTube. So to be at this milestone where we're at right now is just such a cool experience to be able to have. I know that I've poured a lot of time, energy, blood, sweat, and tears into building up this channel and building up this community. And so just wanted to take a moment to say thank you. If you are watching on YouTube, please make sure that you're subscribed. That way you are counted in that overall number, and we are so close to 100K. I'm looking forward to, I need to figure out some way to celebrate when we do get there, but I am very much looking forward to it. All right, now let's get into all of the latest. Now, I know we have a lot to cover when it comes to the reactions that we're seeing to Russia's recent attack in Ukraine's Sumy region, why that attack was carried out, and so on and so forth. But I actually want to start with what Mr. Steve Witkoff had to say about his recent direct meeting with Russian President Putin. This was actually their third in-person meeting in recent months. And Witkoff said that it went on for nearly 5 hours. He also said that it was towards the end when they started putting together a framework for what a possible deal would look like that would be aimed at ending the war in Ukraine.
This peace deal is about these so-called 5 territories, but there's so much more to it. There's security protocols. There's no NATO, Article 5. I mean, it's just, a lot of detail attached to it. It's a complicated situation.
Now, Witkoff didn't go too much into detail there. He kept it pretty broad, and this is pretty much what we've heard from Russia over and over again. I did think it was interesting, though, his mention of the 5 territories. So what is he talking about? Well, first and foremost, you, of course, have Crimea, which voted to join Russia back in 2014, voted to return to Russia more specifically, and has been acting as part of the Russian Federation ever since. You also have Donetsk and Lugansk, which voted to become independent regions, right? Declared their own independence in 2014 because they saw the Western-backed coup that was carried out in Kiev. They wanted no part of that, and so they proceeded accordingly. And then they voted to join Russia in referendums that were held back in September 2022. And then you have Kherson and Zaporozhye, which also were previously part of Ukraine and then voted to join Russia again in referendums that were held in September 2022. So you have these 5 territories, all with kind of different stories, but all of them are considered under Russian law part of the Russian Federation. So it makes sense that at the bare minimum, if we're talking about an agreement, Russia is calling for recognition of these territories. Now, I did mention this in a recent episode of Sanction, which I'll link below. It's not necessarily that Russia needs Western recognition of these territories. It's more so that it is literally the baseline, right? They are sitting there saying, look, we've spent over a decade now listening to the West say, oh, Russia annexed Crimea, right? Acting as if, oh, Russia forced all of these people under their control. So if Russia is dealing with Crimea as well as additional regions where people there have voted overwhelmingly to join the Russian Federation, then they're saying if there is going to be peace between us and the West, us and whoever is in charge in Kiev, then they have to have that recognition first and foremost. And I'll just add in here to say the fact that Putin has met with Witkoff 3 separate times, and the fact that this meeting was nearly 5 hours is notable because, as we'll get into a little later on in this video, we're kind of seeing some members of the Trump administration, namely Marco Rubio, getting kind of frustrated with Russia right now, kind of throwing it out there that maybe Russia doesn't want peace. Maybe they're not serious about coming to some sort of an agreement. Maybe they're just dragging out this dialogue. And to a certain extent, yeah, they are dragging out this dialogue because they can, because time is on their side, because as Donald Trump himself previously admitted, Russia has the cards here. They don't have to make a deal. They are not in the position that Kiev is in right now, and they're also not in the position that the US is in right now. So because they have time on their side, because they have all of those advantages, yeah, they're going to use them. Yeah, they're going to lay out their demands and say, hey, this is what is required in order for us to agree to some sort of a deal. And people like Marco Rubio don't have to like it, but guess what? There's not much they can do to change the reality of the situation on the battlefield. And as much as they hate it, I do think that they are aware of it. But then there's also the Kiev factor, because the reality is that, look, Witkoff and Putin, they can have negotiations. Trump and Putin, they can have talks, and they can come up with some pretty little deal. They can slap a bow on it and say, you know what? The US is going to agree to recognize these 5 regions as part of Russia. They're going to agree that Ukraine will never become a NATO member, right? That there is going to be a neutral status that is required for Ukraine, and so on and so forth. And they can sign a deal. But what's to say that Kiev is going to agree to that? Because as we've already seen, when Trump and Putin agreed to a limited partial ceasefire involving the targeting of energy infrastructure, oh, well, it took about 5 minutes for Moscow to come out and say, hey, we have evidence that Kiev has violated this agreement. And we have yet to see any evidence from the Trump administration that Mr. Trump went over to Mr. Zelensky and said, hey, we agreed to this partial ceasefire. You need to comply with it. Instead, the Trump administration just sits back and is like, we can only do so much to control Kiev. And because of that, because you're not seeing any legitimate pressure put on Zelensky, oh, well, then what does he do? He sits down for a recent interview with CBS 60 Minutes, and he says that, well, first and foremost, he admits that Kiev is not going to be able to retake those territories. But instead of just saying, you know what, we're respecting the will of the people who live there, we're giving it up to Russia, those people have decided that they want to be part of Russia, we're allowing that to happen because there's not much we can do otherwise. Oh, no, then he says, we'll agree to a quote unquote diplomatic end to the war, but we will never agree to recognize those territories.
А нам не вистачає сил деокупувати все. І це зрозуміла ситуація на сьогодні. І тому дипломатично ця війна закінчиться. Ми не визнаємо території руськими, ті, які тимчасово окуповані.
And the fact that Zelensky is not saying something like that in private and then it's being leaked and we're finding out his true feelings. Oh, no, he's saying that out in public. He's saying that in an interview that he knows is going to be broadcast to a Western audience. Because of that, he's literally proving Russia's point right there, which is, number one, Kiev cannot be trusted. Number two, any sort of deal that the West is able to corral Kiev into has the potential to turn into the next version of the Minsk agreement, right? A Minsk III deal where we freeze the conflict for a minute. And then the danger is that NATO is able to rearm the Kiev regime and prepare them for the next phase of war with Russia, and it is essentially a never-ending war that is just frozen for a little bit, which Russia has said repeatedly. I don't know how many more times they can say it, but they have made it known that that is unacceptable to them. And if there's anything you can guarantee from the US establishment, it's that they always want more and more war. And we're seeing that right now, as in the aftermath of a recent Russian attack carried out in Ukraine's Sumy region. Oh, the establishment has gone full force to make it clear that this should be what leads to the Trump administration beating the war drums against Russia, right? Imposing more sanctions, trying to do everything in their power to quote unquote put more pressure on Russia because they say of this one attack. Now, the initial report from the Associated Press was that Russia launched 2 ballistic missiles into the Ukrainian city of Sumy on Sunday morning, killing 34 people and injuring over 100 others, including several children. The report also noted the presence of multiple black body bags on the streets after the attack. They had photos galore, and so the story spread like wildfire. Russia's defense ministry, however, says that it was targeting a meeting of the Ukrainian military's commanding officers and that it killed more than 60 of them. The report also noted that other Ukrainian lawmakers said there was an award ceremony held for the troops in the area and that Russia had gotten word of the gathering. And even the mayor of Sumy is now faulting the regional governor for planning a military ceremony in this region that is so close to the front line. And it does make you wonder, why are we gathering all of these troops together here? Why are we holding this ceremony here? And was it something that was done deliberately, right? Was it just something that they were dumb enough to do, hope that Russia wouldn't catch wind of it, and that they wouldn't take notice to the fact that, as the Wall Street Journal reported, the Russian military strike killed a Ukrainian colonel who was a commander of a Ukrainian artillery brigade that is equipped with advanced US HIMARS rocket launchers? Or was it deliberate? Was there some sort of bait that they were hoping that Russia would take, hoping that civilians would be killed, and then that they would have another excuse to offer this attack up on a silver platter to the West and to say, look what Russia did. They killed civilians, and therefore the West should continue in an endless war and escalate to World War III. And just to be clear here, the killing of every innocent civilian is tragic, right? No matter where they are in the world, no matter whether it's Ukraine, Russia, Gaza, Lebanon, the list goes on and on. It is absolutely tragic. But look at the way that the mainstream media here in the West is using what they say is the killing of civilians. They're using it to call for more and more war. They're using it to call for more escalations against Russia instead of calling for an end to this war. Instead of looking at the war in Ukraine and saying, how in the world did we get into this, and how do we get out of it? How was it allowed to continue on for this long? And I'm not saying that, oh, their answer needs to be that they need to put more pressure on Russia, because that's how we got to this point. The refusal to talk to Russia, the thought that, oh, we're just going to hit Russia with all of these sanctions, we're going to try to completely isolate and destroy its economy. The idea that that is somehow the answer to the violence that we're seeing on the ground in Ukraine is how you get more and more war. The refusal to listen to Russia, when for years now they have said, these are our security concerns, these are what need to be addressed, this is what NATO needs to stop doing as they're encroaching closer and closer to our territory. All of those things, all of those warning signs that were ignored got us to where we are at this point right now, where innocent civilians are being killed on the ground. And this idea here in the West and in some members of the Trump administration that anytime an innocent civilian is killed in Ukraine, oh, that means that the US needs to rise up against Russia and do what? Because that's another aspect to the conversation. What are they going to do? Because the reality is there's not much that they can do against Russia, short of World War III. But of course, that logic, or maybe the lack thereof, has not stopped at least some members in the Trump administration from calling for more pressure against Russia anyway. At least that's according to the latest reports. As you have the Wall Street Journal reporting that there is now a divide within the Trump administration, and that certain figures like Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Special Ukraine-Russia envoy Keith Kellogg are putting pressure on the president to take a harder line against Putin. Now, it's interesting to me that the two main figures that they name here are Kellogg and Rubio, because as we know, when it comes to Keith Kellogg, he really hasn't been involved in these US-Russia talks. In fact, it's even been reported that the Russian government straight up said that they wanted nothing to do with him, that they did not want him to be the guy to handle talks because he was a bit too close to Ukraine. And they said that they would deal with Steve Witkoff, who's supposed to be Trump's Middle East envoy, instead. instead. But as for Mr. Marco Rubio, now I will always know him as a lifelong warmonger. I do not buy this new version, this Marco Rubio 2.0 that's now talking about how it's not normal to have a unipolar world, right? That we need to pursue a multipolar world order, blah, blah, blah. I don't buy it. I think that he's smart enough to know that he needs to reinvent himself a little bit and he needs to kind of go along with the Trump way of doing things, at least as Trump is presenting it right now, in the sense that Trump doesn't want World War III against Russia, therefore Rubio's not going to pursue that. However, I would not be surprised whatsoever, and I have no evidence that he is putting pressure on Trump privately, but it would not surprise me if this report was accurate and if that was the case. If Rubio was in private, at least telling Trump, we need to put more pressure on Russia, we need to do XYZ. In public, however, Rubio is being careful. As in a post on X, he called the attack in Sumy horrifying and said that it was a tragic reminder of why President Trump and his administration are putting so much time and effort into trying to end this war and achieve durable peace. Now, Rubio is also getting criticism for not publicly condemning Russia, or I guess saying more to condemn Russia for the attack in that statement. He's probably not saying that or not throwing out that condemnation because of the way that Trump is treating this, the fact that he also called it horrible, but said that he believed that the attack was a mistake. But beyond that, that doesn't mean that Rubio isn't talking. As earlier this month, he told reporters in Brussels following a NATO gathering that, quote, we will know soon enough, in a matter of weeks, not months, whether Russia is serious about peace or not, and that the US is losing patience with talks about talks. And I'm guessing that talks about talks is how Rubio would describe that nearly 5-hour meeting that Steve Witkoff just held with Russian President Putin. But it brings me back to the point. Okay, what can the US do? What can they do? Can they force a peace deal on Russia? No. Can they force Russia to hurry up and to accept their demands, to hurry up and to accept a full ceasefire? No. This coming Sunday, Easter Sunday, was supposed to be the day when a ceasefire was in place, according to multiple reports that were floating around as Trump was getting into office. Guess what's not happening by this Sunday? A full ceasefire. Not that the Trump administration hasn't tried. They've tried. They've talked to Russia. They've done what they can. They've had multiple different meetings between American and Russian officials. But the point is, Russia holds the cards here. So this idea that Rubio's saying, oh, we'll find out if Russia is serious about peace. Okay, well, what if you feel like they're not serious about peace? Then what are you going to do? And I think that Trump understands that. To a certain extent, he's not exactly showing that. But it is interesting the rhetoric that he's using, because this is one of the criticisms I've had of Trump, is that he is now fully responsible, fully complicit for the US proxy war against Russia under his second term, right? Yes, obviously the Biden administration has its responsibility for it. I would argue that the Trump administration has its responsibility, which took place during its first term, as you've heard Trump brag about giving javelins to Kiev, right, and to Ukrainian forces. He's bragged about that. Those weapons were used against Russia. Guess what? Trump also played a role in it during his first term, and now he's doing the exact same thing during his second. And although, yes, the US is talking to Russia, I will give credit where credit is due. I keep getting comments saying that I'm being too anti-Trump or too critical of Trump. I will give him credit for talking to Russia, absolutely. But at the same time, I also have to mention the fact that he is actively keeping the US involved in this war. He cut off military aid and intelligence sharing for a week, about 5 minutes in the grand scheme of things, and then he gave it right back. And when he gave it right back, he made it so that his administration is now directly responsible, right, for every attack that is carried out by Ukrainian forces using intelligence that was straight from the US. That is another way in which Trump is directly responsible for being a direct party to this war. And yet Trump keeps flip-flopping on Zelensky, on how he seems to feel about Zelensky. And that was evident this week once again in the Oval Office.
He's always looking to purchase missiles. You know, he's against, listen, when you start a war, you got to know that you can win the war, right? You don't start a war against somebody that's 20 times your size and then hope that people give you some missiles.
Now, anyone who has paid attention to the last several years, say more than a decade of tensions between the US and Russia, is well aware that we are not seeing a war in Ukraine right now because of Zelensky. Zelensky is the US puppet. At some point, he will officially be the US fall guy, right? The demise of Zelensky, everything will be blamed on him. And that's what Trump has been setting up since he first got into office. Sure, he'll say he tried to work with him, but that didn't end up working out. But I think what you're seeing from Trump right now is this realization that there's only so much that the US can do, right? They can't force Russia into a peace deal. They can't force Russia to end this war. But at the same time, they also can only do so much to force Ukraine into a peace deal. They also can only do so much to force the Kiev regime and all of the violent right-wing extremists in Kiev that have been playing a major factor in the direction of the government there in the aftermath of the Western-backed coup in Kiev back in 2014, that there's only so much the US can do to try to get them to work with Russia. Because again, they've spent the last 11 years and more so, but the last 11 years publicly pushing them in a direction where they will be in a forever war with Russia. So if Trump really does want to get out of it, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to happen overnight. And it's yet another reminder that US foreign policy continues to be determined by the US establishment. Because even if we see a winding down of the war in Ukraine, even if we see the US and Russia back away from the cliff that is World War III, we still have the US actively supporting genocide against the Palestinian people in Gaza. We still have the US threatening tensions or maybe an all-out war against Iran. And we still have the US actively preparing for war against China. The war machine does not stop. It does not come to a halt just because there's some new guy in office. It continues on, it changes directions, and it continues to threaten not only the countries it targets, but also the US and its standing in the world as a whole. And that's something everyone should be talking about.
States aligned itself with ISIS and Al Qaeda again. And does that alliance include the use of air power in order to attack the Houthis in Yemen?
Well, you know the United States preference for proxies. We'd much rather use someone else's ground force against our opponents than do it ourselves. So I think there is very definitely an effort right now to organize and recruit from the elements that you just mentioned in the Saudi Peninsula or the Arabian Peninsula and use them on the ground while we bomb and support from the air and the sea. Clearly, there's no willingness to use the United States Marine Corps, which one would have thought, if you were serious about this, that you would have landed some Marines somewhere. This is exactly the sort of thing for which the Marine Corps was originally devised. Raids the shore to destroy enemies or seize key points, harbors, and so forth. So it looks like it's possible, yes.
And of course, ISIS and Al Qaeda have been declared by the Secretary of State and the Secretary of the Treasury as terrorist organizations, and it is a felony to provide material assistance to terrorist organizations. But I guess somehow that doesn't apply to the Department of Defense and the CIA.
Well, you know that it certainly didn't apply to Senator McCain, who is behind that sort of thing in Syria and in northern Iraq.
and actually went over to encourage turning the various Islamist organizations with equipment against, at the time, the Assad regime and his allies. So I guess this is nothing new and yet another flagrant disregard for the law.
Is there any reason, any military reason to justify the United States attacking and killing people in Yemen other than to satisfy the bellicosity of Prime Minister Netanyahu?
Well, obviously, we would like to see the uninterrupted flow of commerce at sea moving through the Suez Canal and the Red Sea. We have a permanent interest in that. And so that makes sense for the Navy to try and protect and enhance that as much as possible. The problem is that we are close, not just simply aligned, we are integrated into the larger Israeli offensive operation in the region. And as such, everything that belongs to Israel and frankly to us is now seen as part of the enemy. And so we're in a very difficult position, Judge. We are effectively at war with everyone and anyone who opposes Israel in the region.
Last week, Prime Minister Netanyahu met for a couple of hours with President Trump. And afterwards, they came out to the Oval Office and held a press conference. And at that press conference, President Trump announced that his emissary, Steve Witkoff, would be speaking directly with the Iranians. Prime Minister Netanyahu seemed aghast at this. I don't know if he knew about it ahead of time, if the president was intending to embarrass him. The Economist and the BBC also reported that Prime Minister Netanyahu came to the Oval Office expecting to talk President Trump into publicly criticizing President Erdogan of Turkey and publicly supporting the Israelis in a war against Iran. And he didn't get either. Do you accept that thesis?
You know, it's very hard to know without having been there, Judge. I mean, first of all, I don't think President Trump wants to be drawn into an Israeli conflict with the Turks. That would be, from the standpoint of U.S. foreign and defense policy, worse than self-defeating. It would be catastrophic. On the other hand, I think that President Trump views this as the last best opportunity to reach some sort of arrangement before he has to commit to Mr. Netanyahu's war with Iran. Now, that may still happen, and I think the president has made that clear. I think he's put himself in a very difficult position. He doesn't have much maneuver room, even though privately he's clearly walked back all of the extreme measures that were outlined in what was effectively an ultimatum to the Iranians. And I think this is a point of serious concern for Mr. Netanyahu, because clearly, if all we're going to demand is that they remain at the 60% uranium enrichment threshold, and otherwise we're largely jettisoning the remaining demands that were made, that certainly does not serve Mr. Netanyahu's long-term purpose. Remember, Mr. Netanyahu made it very clear he wants the Libyan solution for Iran, and I would argue that that's Mr. Zelensky's solution for Russia. So Mr. Trump is now dealing with two recalcitrant supposed allies with whom we have no official treaty whatsoever in either case. But nevertheless, we regard Zelensky and Netanyahu as allies.
Here's what you said earlier with our friend Colonel Davis about the military strength of Iran. Chris, cut number 15.
What nation on the planet can have their embassy destroyed in another country and to have an assassination in their capital city on an inauguration and not go to war with somebody? Yet that's exactly what Iran didn't do, because they don't have the power to do it. So that should tell you.
Wait a minute. That's a fundamentally false statement.
Which part?
False. They don't have the power to go to war. You haven't looked carefully at Iran. Iran's arsenal of missiles is enormous. It could flatten Israel in a day. They have the power to go to war. They have chosen repeatedly to avoid war. And I've said this 1,000 times. No one in the Middle East is interested in a war except Israel and the United States.
This is the Trump foreign policy establishment. Vance, Hegseth, Rubio, Gorka, Waltz. Do they understand that?
What is the foreign policy of the United States? I think the foreign policy of the United States is two-dimensional. On the one hand, it's whatever President Trump says on any given day. And on the other hand, it's the permanent neocon bureaucracy of which his administration is a part. So I think you've got two dimensions there. He is very impulsive. I see no strategy, no coherent approach of any kind to anything, whether that involves widespread deportation of illegal aliens, the systematic securing of the border, ending the war in Ukraine as quickly as possible, or anything else. Where is the strategy? What is the approach? What's the framework? I don't see anything. So we're back to, well, it's whatever President Trump said today or yesterday. And I'm sure he's quite satisfied with that. And on the other hand, all of these other people you mentioned, somebody said recently, if you hire clowns, then you get a circus. Well, I think the rest of the people that you mentioned are very much involved in the broader circus.
Here's one of the ringmasters on Sunday morning, Chris, cut number 9.
He's dead serious that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. He's said that for 20 years. He's been consistent. That is clear. But he's also dead serious that if we can't figure this out at the negotiating table, then there are other options, to include my department, to ensure that Iran never has a nuclear bomb. We hope we never get there. We really do, Maria. But what we're doing with the Houthis and what we're doing in the region, we've shown a capability to go far, to go deep, and to go big. And again, we don't want to do that. But if we have to, we will, to prevent the nuclear bomb in Iran's hands.
Have they gone far, deep, big, and been effective in trying to degrade the Houthis?
Well, on the one hand, I'm a little confused, because I think what we're really saying to everyone is not that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. It's that Israel must maintain a nuclear monopoly in the region. That's what this is really all about. Otherwise, it sounded as though he was describing a pornographic film that he'd seen at some point, because the rest of it didn't make any damn sense. The Houthis are still with us. They've sustained tremendous effects from bombing. I don't think you can bomb your way to success in the Middle East. Years ago, somebody, I think it was an admiral, who said, you can't kill your way to success. Well, I think we're at the point now where we just try to bomb our way to success. It's not going to happen.
What would he have said? How could you know what he would have said? But I mean, you've forgotten more than he's ever known, without getting personal. What would he have said if she said to him, well, why can Israel have a nuclear weapon and Iran can't? How could he have answered that?
Well, I think he'd have probably been stumped. It's not something that he's ever dealt with. It's something that nobody in the United States can address. Because to suggest that if Israel has 300 nuclear weapons that they can launch at a moment's notice from the air, from the land, or from sea, makes it impossible for a state the size of Iran or Turkey or Saudi Arabia or Egypt or any other numbers of states in the region to live without a nuclear deterrent, because there's nothing they can do to stop the Israelis from effectively annihilating them if they choose to do so. So we don't view things from that standpoint. Our assumption is the only people that have a right to a nuclear capability in the region are the Israelis, and that's justified on the basis of the fact that they are Israelis.
On his way back from his home in Florida on Sunday night on Air Force One, the president spoke at length. We've reduced it to 60 seconds. I'm going to tell you ahead of time what I'm going to ask you. Is the war in Ukraine now Donald Trump's war? But before you answer, here's what he had to say about it. Cut number 1.
Do you have a reaction to Russia's Palm Sunday attack on Ukraine?
I think it was terrible, and I was told they made a mistake. But I think it's a horrible thing. I think the whole war is a horrible thing. I think the war is For that war to have started is an abuse of power.
They said they made him. You were told they made a mistake.
They
Do you mean it was unintentional?
They made a mistake. I believe it was. Look, you're going to ask them. This is Biden's war. This is not my war. I've been here for a very short period of time. This is a war that was under Biden. He gave him billions and billions of dollars. He should have never allowed, if he had any brain, which he didn't have and doesn't have, and now it's being proven, he wouldn't have allowed that war to start. I would have absolutely not. That war would never have taken place. But remember this is Biden's war. I'm just trying to get it stopped so that we can save a lot of lives. They happen to be Ukrainian and Russian lives. But all I want to do is get it stopped.
So the legislation under which President Biden shipped about 165 to 190, it's hard to put a finger on it. There are different ways to measure it, as you know, billion in military equipment and cash to Kyiv, and under which President Trump has shipped $1 billion in military equipment to Kyiv, specifies that equipment is to be shipped at the discretion of the president. Question, is this now Donald Trump's war?
Yes. The only way it could not have been his war would have been had he stood there on the day after his inauguration or signed an executive order or something and made it clear that we were going to cease sending all forms of military aid to Ukraine, number one. And number two, that all U.S. personnel in and out of uniform, intelligence, civilian, doesn't make any difference, would leave Ukraine within 48 hours. Had he done that, then this would not be his war, but he did the opposite. And effectively, what he's done since he's been in there is largely extend Biden policies. So now he owns it. He knows how to stop it, and that's just what I described. But, you know, this has always been a problem for him because he surrounds himself with people who give him reasons to act against his wisdom, against his own instincts. Let me tell you, back in April of 2022, I received a call from Mar-a-Lago, and a voice at the other end said, "What do you think about Ukraine and what's happening there?" This was probably the first week of April 2022. I said, "Well, this thing's a catastrophe. We need to stop it immediately." He said, "Why?" This particular voice. I said, "Well, if we don't stop it, the Russians are going to crush the Ukrainians." And the voice at the other end said, "Well, everyone here says that the Ukrainians are winning, the Russians are losing." And I said, "Well, first of all, that's wrong. It's not true. And then secondly, we have no interest in a war in that region. What we have an interest in is peace and stability. And whatever we can do to bring peace and stability to the region should be our top priority, because otherwise we have no stake in Eastern Ukraine whatsoever." So I think you've always had people like Gorka, like Waltz. I mean, they may have other names. It doesn't make any difference. They surround the president and they try to persuade him that nothing can happen unless we are somehow or another directly involved in it, even though it may have no value strategically to us at all. And secondly, that we have to impose a solution, because if we don't, we look weak. And this is back to the question of how do we get a win for the boss? Wait a minute. This is not UFC night. This is not a college basketball match. This is life and death for millions of people at the moment in Ukraine. But if we're not careful, this could spread, not because of anything that President Putin wants to do, but because of the stupids who are ruling in Paris and London and Berlin. They could cause it to expand. And of course, that would be delightful for the fools living in Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, all of whom could be crushed in 24 hours. All of this nonsense needs to end. He's the leader of NATO. He commands NATO effectively. So he's the one that stands up and says, "It's over. We're out. I'm not supporting this any longer." And as soon as you do that, everything changes. Zelensky's out of a job. Zelensky has no future. His corrupt criminal regime in a country that is potentially the most corrupt in the world, if such a thing is possible, will go under. This is why he owns it now. It's tragic. It's unnecessary. because right, he didn't want this, because he's not stopping it.
But Colonel, President Trump's official emissary to Ukraine, General Kellogg, actually proposed a solution. I mean, this is insane, but this is what he proposed. And the solution is to divide Ukraine up the way Berlin was right after 1945. Has he been living under a rock for the past 3 years? Does he think that such a solution would even be considered for a millisecond by Foreign Minister Lavrov or with whomever Mr. Witkoff is negotiating?
Well, I don't think General Kellogg's audience is in Moscow. I think his audience is in Western Europe, the three capitals that I mentioned earlier.
Right.
And he's got a big audience back here in Washington, D.C. These are foolish people that think that somehow or another we and the world and Europe will all benefit from sustaining this conflict. And there's just no evidence for that. The conflict is destructive. It's harming everyone. It's harmed us economically as well as strategically. Stop and consider that we've learned a couple of very important things over the last few years. Number one, that our equipment, our organization, our tactics don't work on the battlefield that exists today. We live in a different world. We have a battlefield, or a battle space, as people like to call it, that has changed dramatically. The Russians have adapted. We haven't. And the genius military leaders that are currently occupying the senior echelons of the U.S. Armed Forces have played a dramatic role deciding how operations will be conducted. And as a result, 1.5 million Ukrainians, somewhere between 1.2 and 1.5 million Ukrainian soldiers are dead. And the war has been lost. And the Russians are now prepared to move further west, consolidate their position before they finally put an end to this. So that's catastrophe number one, but we're not coming to terms with that reality. If we looked objectively at the battle space and understood what's happened militarily, we'd figure out pretty damn quick we're not in a position to do business effectively on the battlefield with the Russians. Number two, look at the tariffs. The tariffs have revealed something, our weakness economically. You know, we went into this tariff war on the basis of the assumption of people like Navarro and presumably Lutnick that foreign capital would then flow into our markets. It's not flowing in. The bond market is a disaster.
Right.
If we're not careful, it's going to hit 5%. When that happens, we lose everything because the Japanese and the Chinese and others are dumping our treasuries. All of this is going on, and yet President Trump continues to vacillate between I want peace, but I'm going to continue to pretend to do these other things, or do these other things because I'm supposed to look strong. This is sheer lunacy.
China makes almost 50% of the ingredients that go into every antibiotic sold in the United States. The F-35, I'm reading from today's Financial Times. The F-35, the backbone of the U.S. Air Force, requires rare earth components only from China. And China owns close to $1 billion, close to $1 trillion of United States bonds.
Yep.
Didn't anybody point these things out to him before he imposed a 145% tariff on all goods coming in from China?
Look, a lot of people don't like Musk, but I think Musk made some rather unkind remarks about Mr. Navarro. And again, I go back to the statement that came from someone, I can't remember the name of the gentleman, that hire clowns, you get a circus. I mean, it doesn't look to me like anybody's done their homework at all. Everything is done impulsively. Everyone's flying from the seat of their pants, most of all the president. And the president needs to surround himself with better, more capable, more cautious people who are going to study these things. Again, the lesson of history is you always measure what you might gain by what you might lose before you do anything, most of all in a war. And most of the time, it makes no sense to turn to the military option, because once you do, everything is out of your control. You can't contain these things. You don't know where things will go next. And yet you have foolish people left and right who want to bomb things. I mean, how many times have we talked about the strategic realities that currently induce the Russians to support Iran. People don't understand that if you're a Russian, you look south, you look into Iran, you look towards the Caucasus, you want friendly states down there, you want peace down there, because that's the soft underbelly of Russia. That's as important to them as Mexico is to us.
Right.
And right now, they're worried that we're going to try and destroy the Iranian regime for Mr. Netanyahu. It's not enough. Remember, Mr. Netanyahu wants the Libyan solution for Iran. And replacing that government with what? Anything that could be hostile to Russia, presumably. And that's the last thing in the world the Russians want. They want to protect their southern borders. They want peace and stability down there. Look, this is just too dumb to repeat over and over and over again. But there is no strategic thinking in Washington. Everything is arrogance and ignorance on steroids.
You know, you mentioned Senator McCain a few minutes ago. My friend Tom Woods was a big fan of yours. Once said, no matter who you vote for, you get John McCain.
I guess it's because a lot of Americans are easily impressed with people who are loud and bloviate threats. I don't know how else to explain it. I mean, there's always been in the United States a certain number of people that I think belong to what I call the bombs away club. And they think if we're dropping bombs on somebody somewhere, that our greatness as a nation somehow or another is expressed. When in reality, you and I know that's not the case. What we should want is what we had before the Second World War. And that was a reputation in the world for fairness and decency. You know, as after World War I ended and the Versailles Treaty was underway, believe it or not, the delegation of Arabs from Syria wanted the United States to provide forces to come there and administer their country. They didn't want the British or the French. And the reason for that was very simple. We were not colonialists. We were not imperialists. And they viewed us as fair and just people. Well, I don't think the people of Syria or anywhere else in the Muslim world would want Americans on their soil ever, based upon what we've seen over the last 30 years. Do you?
No, fully agreed, Colonel. Colonel, thank you for your time. Thanks for accommodating my schedule today.
Started off camera. I'm like, hey, everybody.
Yeah.
What's going on? We're still getting it worked out.
Don't you move. Don't you move.
Okay. I won't
let
move.
the team move.
Also, I'm getting used to that. I'm finding you guys. Yeah. So we're still getting settled in here. So I apologize. Thanks for sticking with us through all the bugs. Before we get to no, we're not going to do the sponsor first.
No, we're not.
We usually do. Sorry.
Right, we're going to get to
that.
Okay. All right. Well, let's get to it then, shall we? Let's get to the news. So we are learning some stunning new details about the latest would-be Trump assassin that the mainstream media has totally ignored. First, let's set the stage here. A 17-year-old kid murders his parents, lives with their bodies for 2 weeks, records a video of his stepdad's corpse surrounded by candles. And that's not even the most disturbing part of the story. If you can believe that, part of it, which is actually creepy enough as it is. No, this young assassin in training had foreign contacts, one of them based in Ukraine, at least one. There could be more, and there likely is more in Ukraine. The same place, of course, that the United States has been sending endless billions without a single receipt. The Democrats, of course, their favorite money laundering machine is the war in Ukraine. And Ukraine was his exit plan, using Ukraine to carry out the assassination and then exit afterwards and get back safely to Ukraine, where he would then be, I guess, taken care of. This teenager, Nikita Kassup, wasn't just fantasizing about violence. he was actively carrying this out. And he allegedly killed his own mother and stepfather to free himself financially and logistically to carry out an assassination plot on President Trump. Like these, in other words, his parents were holding him back from carrying out his plan. They were just getting in the way of all of this, and he was being held back by this. Well, now we have the new FBI affidavit today from the FBI agent working this case. I want to kind of go through this here because the DOJ and the FBI say his motive was crystal clear. Quote, to obtain the financial means and autonomy necessary to carry out the murder of Donald Trump. And you can read the affidavit for yourself. It's long. It's a stunning read. But it gets worse. Kasip wasn't just working alone. So you can throw out the lone gunman story if you want. And we now know that Thomas Crooks also wasn't working alone in Butler, Pennsylvania. None of these guys were working alone. Why isn't this the biggest story in mainstream media? Like, just take a pause here. If this was Barack Obama or Joe Biden, for that matter, and you found out that there was a criminal conspiracy that involved a foreign government and the intelligence community to kill a sitting president, it would be wall-to-wall coverage on CNN, on MSNBC. Turning on MSNBC today, no mention of it. Zero. CNN, the same thing. Zero. It's unbelievable. So according to the federal agents, Kasip was texting someone with a Ukrainian phone number and another person inside of Russia, Ukrainian sympathizer, both of whom were allegedly helping him figure out how to build a bomb-dropping drone, because they've been really good at this, dropping bombs with drones on them, right? Hitting apartment complexes in the Belgorod region of Russia, flying them right into windows and killing civilians. So he literally asked them how to weaponize a drone, and his Ukrainian connections were helping him to commit presidential assassination on U.S. soil. And maybe there's nothing here, I'm sure. Maybe there's just nothing to look at all. I don't believe that for a second, of course. So were these people on the other end of that encrypted chat? Who were they? And why was one of them in Ukraine? I hope we learn who these people are from the DOJ. According to the affidavit, Kasip had fully immersed himself in the darkest corners of the internet. He was hanging out in a satanic cult forum. He loved neo-Nazis and was a big fan of Ukraine's Azov battalion, the Nazis that the Biden administration aligned themselves with. And he was a big fan of the group called NSWP, National Socialism / White Power. So think of this guy kind of like as a mix. I was thinking of this guy kind of like as a mix between like Charles Manson, the Azov battalion, and a Discord server from hell. And that's literally your guy trying to kill President Trump. Also, it's kind of interesting that Democrats love to call Trump a Nazi, and a literal Nazi was trying to kill him for not being Nazi enough. People conflate the two all the time, right? Nazis were socialists. Trump is the opposite of a socialist, so they hate him for that. They hate that he won't, marginalize black people. They hate that he got a huge amount of vote in the Hispanic community during this last election.
They hate that he loves capitalism.
Yeah, exactly. They hate that he loves business. This is really, really, detrimental to socialists and Nazis who really don't want that at all. So this would-be assassin, Kasip, even wrote a manifesto calling for Trump's death, then talked about fleeing to Ukraine after the job was done. So let me ask this question. What kind of a teenager kills his parents, builds a bomb plot, and thinks that Ukraine is a safe zone for him after he carries out an assassination, unless, of course, someone told him it would be a safe zone? So someone tells him Ukraine will take care of him, so then he allegedly kills his parents, then stays in the house with the parents' corpses for 2 full weeks. And he didn't just ignore the corpses, he actually filmed them with candles and made a video of his stepfather's body with candles surrounding it like some sort of satanic cult ritual. And again, according to the FBI, This guy was in no rush at all. He had a plan. He was being methodical about it. He was calculating according to the affidavit. And after the murders, the next move in his mind was, I'm going to Ukraine where I'll have a safe house. He even messaged one of his contacts, quote, I'm quoting him now, so while in Ukraine, I'll be able to live a normal life, even when it's found out what I did. Like he's asking, like, yeah, you've already assured me like this would be the case. So like, I'll be able to live a normal life there. Like I'll be sort of like praised over there. I mean, you don't ask a question like that unless you've been sort of led to believe the answer is yes. Am I wrong? I mean, that's the way that I read it. This isn't speculation. This is straight from the DOJ's affidavit. And why does the US media cover it from one day and then they just suddenly memory hold the damn thing? Ukraine's numbers keep showing up on caller ID for these would-be assassins, like it did with Ryan Routh, the guy who tried to kill Trump at Mar-a-Lago on the golf course. The CIA knew exactly who Routh was. Of course they did. And that he was in Ukraine, of course, playing mercenary with his mercenary friends. So today, I mean, we can switch gears a little bit today because now we've got this hearing today. So
let me just play devil's advocate a little bit.
He would be a devil and you would be advocate. Yeah.
Okay.
It's appropriate.
Is it possible? I mean, you can get a Google Voice Ukrainian number, right? And so is it possible then that there's another group trying to make it look like this is Ukrainian? That clearly is possible. But why? Right. And so why is no one asking these questions?
So sort of like
why
a trap?
would somebody? Yes, right.
Maybe.
Well, yeah,
we don't know.
Because like I would question that like a government getting involved in this simply for the fact that let's say they were successful. What has changed? Like if Ukraine is trying to change their own like political landscape, what then now JD Vance is there, and has he given any indication that he's going to be pro-Ukraine and turn the money back on for the war effort? I mean, how far down the chain would they have to go before they'd find a sympathetic person? That just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, these assassination attempts were Trump was a candidate though, and so for Ryan,
no, he was president-elect at this point.
Okay,
right. So
yes,
Ryan Routh was president-elect.
Yes, you get JD Vance, and JD Vance has the same platform about ending the war in Ukraine. But for Ryan Routh, at least, they wanted to prevent a Trump presidency. And they probably were banking on the fact that JD Vance couldn't get elected on his own, or the Republicans could not replace him with another person of this ideology.
Yeah. I mean, and now this one, of course, just happened. So now, but here's my question is like, how many more have we not even learned about? Right? How many more of these have been kept quiet from us right now? And how many more of this or do we have like Ukrainian connections with? So let's just talk about Ryan Routh, because today, big news in the Ryan Routh story, the man accused of trying to assassinate President Trump was back in court today. And we're getting more confirmation of everything we already warned you about here on this show. And, people, oh, you guys are conspiracy theorists. And then you go in court and they actually talk about it in front of a judge. So glad to be called a conspiracy theorist. So let's be clear. This is the same guy we told you about weeks ago who allegedly tried to buy a rocket launcher from someone in Ukraine using encrypted Telegram messages. That's not new. Of course, you heard it here. When we first reported that a few weeks ago here on the show, we reported on the encrypted messages. We reported the RPG request. We reported the quote about Trump being, quote, bad for Ukraine that they got from his Telegram messages with Ukrainian weapons dealers. All of it. But today's hearing in Florida federal court just cemented what prosecutors are building here, that this, in fact, was a conspiracy. So prosecutors laying out before the judge that this is a conspiracy. This guy wasn't a lone wolf. He was not a lone gunman. He had help. Prosecutors say this wasn't some unstable guy with a grudge. This was a politically motivated assassination plot with Ukrainian entanglements. So once again, the word Ukraine is sitting front and center today in court in Florida. Prosecutors are going all in on the Ukrainian connection. They reiterated that Routh went to encrypted apps, tried to procure military-grade weapons, not from Craigslist, not from some gun show, but from Ukraine. And as we played you a soundbite from Tucker a few weeks ago here on the show, over 50% of all of these weapons have been sold on the black market. They're getting them, receiving them, and selling them off to terrorists, known terrorists, and drug cartels. So that's two attempted assassins, two Ukrainian connections, And we don't know to what lengths, Thomas Crooks may have been connected using encrypted applications on forums and so forth with Ukraine. We don't know that. Of course, his body was burned almost immediately and cremated so that no one could analyze that. Like, I really hope that we get some answers from Pam Bondi now and Kash Patel, because that was the FBI under Biden that just took his body and just cremated it, like, right away. His apartment was like totally wiped clean, no silverware, no nothing. Like, who was this ghost in Butler, Pennsylvania? So what the hell is going on here? Of course, the corporate media won't touch that question, ignoring their money laundering operation in Ukraine. Ralph's trial, by the way, is set to begin on September 8th. So let's see if he actually survives to see that trial and we hear public evidence in trial, because this guy, he's on a path to like Epstein Island, Epsteining himself, because maybe a lot of information might actually come out during this trial that the deep state doesn't absolutely want in front of the American people. So let us know your thoughts on that.
All right. Before we move on to talk about more serious matters, I want to let you know that
paper currencies. 620 or go to
about the Chinese reaction, both political and economic, to President Trump's tariffs. But before we get there, some background questions on which I want to pick your brain. Do you sense there is a divide? What is that? Are you with us, Pepe? All righty.
Hello. Yes.
Okay.
Can you see me?
What was that you just held up?
100 yuan bill, because you mentioned paper wealth, and I'm presenting you and our audience through paper wealth.
All right. We'll get to paper wealth in a minute. Do you sense that there is a divide in the president's foreign policy team between the neocons like Hegseth and Rubio and Gorka and Waltz, and the America Firsters like Gabbard and Vance and Witkoff?
There is, and in terms of so-called China policy, it's an absolute disaster, because I would venture to say that none of them understand China. Just to give a little background for our audience, I spent the day today here in Shanghai at Fudan University. I had a seminar with Professor Zhang Weiwei, which is among the top 3 and top 5 Chinese intellectuals. And our theme was the Russia-China strategic partnership. But then, of course, it extrapolated, and we were discussing the US-China relationship. Our audience was absolutely top of the line. PhD students from different areas at Fudan University. And something that you feel in the atmosphere here in Shanghai. I've been coming to Shanghai for over 30 years. And you feel in the streets, not only the absolutely extraordinary tech development of China, but resilience, resistance, national pride, and enormous derision, even from taxi drivers to academics and diplomats, in terms of the so-called China policy or different containment policies of the US. So this is really a new paradigm. China used to be passive in terms of appreciating the hyperpower and not unleashing their fury when they are mistreated, which is how the Chinese nation at the moment, Judge, is evaluating this new stage of the trade war against China.
Before we get to the trade war, the Secretary of Defense was in Japan 10 days ago, and he looked toward Taiwan and threatened China. How does China react to threats like that? I mean, it is inconceivable, I think, that the American military could defeat a Chinese military effort to isolate or take over Taiwan. And here we have the American Secretary of Defense threatening to do just that, just a few miles away.
Yes, exactly. A Secretary of Defense who doesn't know what ASEAN is and what BRICS are. Fantastic. As for his CV, no wonder Hegseth, Rubio, and especially Trump here, they are treated with utmost derision. In terms of a civilization state, 5,000 years like China, which what we were discussing this afternoon with Professor Zhang Weiwei, and incredibly smart PhDs from everywhere. And they were, at the same time, they were stunned by how this new American leadership knows virtually nothing about China.
All right, we're hoping that the signal comes back. You were telling us
Yes.
that, okay, the new
Is it
American
back?
leadership knows nothing about China. Pick up from there.
Yes, for instance, very few people in the Beltway, Judge, including members of Team Trump 2.0, know about how the new Silk Roads were started by China, by President Xi in Kazakhstan 12 years ago, in fact, as an overarching Chinese foreign policy mechanism, geopolitical and geoeconomic. And also very few know about the details of the project Made in China 2025. When Trump launched the first batch of sanctions against China at the beginning of Trump 1.0, these were against Made in China 2025. And what do we see now in Shanghai in terms of Made in China 2025? In 10 high-tech domains, China is already #1 in 7 and going to 8th and soon all 10.
Well, let me ask you this. Who is hurt more by American presidentially imposed tariffs of 145%? Chinese manufacturers and consumers or American manufacturers and consumers?
American manufacturers, consumers, and all the American multinationals who delocalized around the world, especially to Asia and especially here in China.
Explain, please.
Well, I would say this is a turbo capitalism process that started decades ago when the American oligarchy, let's put it this way, and I'm being very diplomatic, decided to delocalize American manufacturing to East Asia, to the Asian tigers, and later on, especially to China, and then later on to India or Vietnam, for instance, or both. So obviously, American productive capacity in terms of a capitalist power was completely hollowed out and transferred abroad. So expecting that American multinationals can relocate to the US whole factories, chains of production in a matter of what, weeks or months, and start producing in the US is absolutely absurd. This is going to take for each of these factories and these chains of production 3, 4, 5 years at least. And China has already way beyond that. And in terms of trade partnership, the US-China trade relation is a fraction of Chinese exports and Chinese global trade. China trades with the global South and the global majority as a whole. Do you know what President Xi Jinping is doing this week? I'm sure you and our audience knows. He's in
Vietnam, is he not?
A mini tour of Southeast Asia, Judge. 3 top Southeast Asian nations. Now Malaysia. He left Vietnam and is going to Malaysia. Why? Because all the 10 members of the ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, who is their #1 trade partner for each and one of them? China. It's very simple. This afternoon, for instance, we were discussing China is, because of this circus dementia on the tariff issue, they're going to get even closer to their neighbors in ASEAN, in the south, to their neighbors in Central Asia, to the west,
All right. Waiting for your internet to come back to us.
Is it back? Yes.
It's back
it's
now.
great.
To their neighbors in the West is where you were.
Their neighbors in the West. And of course, West Asia at the moment is a theater of war, which for the Chinese is a terrifying prospect because potential trade partners in West Asia are very important. And the most important for them is Iran. Iran happens to be a BRICS member, a Shanghai Cooperation Organization member, and they have a strategic partnership with China, which brings us back to the zillion-dollar question of if there's going to be a Zionist attack against Iran, it will be a Zionist attack against 3 top BRICS, because they all have interlocking strategic partnerships.
Will those 3 top BRICS use their militaries to resist a Zionist or American or joint attack on Iran?
Iran will. Russia and China, it depends. It's a very complex question, including the provisions in the Russia-Iran strategic partnership signed end of January in Moscow and ratified by the Duma in the past few days. Very, very important. What we know for sure, if there was an attack, Russia would find ways to help Iran. What Putin describes, it's a beautiful euphemism, in fact, military technical measures. And the Russians are very good at that kind of thing.
Would the Chinese find military and technical measures with which to aid the Iranians in an attack by the US or Israel?
Nobody can answer this question with certainty, Judge. The Chinese are not a warrior nation, first of all, very, very important. But they will find endless ways to help the Iranian economy, depending how much the Iranian economy would suffer after such an attack, because they are their main partner in West Asia. And it all comes back to the overarching geopolitical and geoeconomic development of China, which is embodied in the New Silk Road, the Belt and Road Initiative. So if there was an attack like that, would be against Eurasia integration, against the Belt and Road Initiative by China, against the Russian notion, which in Moscow is called Greater Eurasia Partnership. That's the official denomination, and against leaders of the Global South and the global majority. Of course, for the moment, we are in the negotiating stage in Oman. So the first one was not so bad, actually, much better than many of us expected. The second meeting is going to be next Saturday in Oman between Witkoff and Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister. So at least they are talking. And here in China, they hyper appreciate all that. But they don't expect any negotiation coming from the US. And the memes that you see around Shanghai and all over China, Judge, in terms of, it's the title of my latest column. A tariff-wielding barbarian could never expect a call from China.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Will Donald Trump wait in vain for a call from President Xi?
Would you mind if I ask you this question, Judge? How do you see
I wouldn't mind. It's always a happy conversation with you. In my opinion, he will wait in vain. It would be like waiting for Godot, who never showed up.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is what not only from President Xi Jinping, the Politburo, the academics, Professor Zhang Weiwei, which is extremely well connected. He was discussing this afternoon. And once again, this is the academic elite of China. Fudan University is one of the top universities, and in humanities, in history, philosophy, for instance, they are, if not number one, number two. And it's a mix of being stunned, appalled, and at the same time, predictable, because they understand the circus, World Wrestling Federation aspect of the Trump administration. But there is something that they simply cannot accept, which is China being mistreated and treated with extreme disrespect. It's
China,
cultural.
China, either the government, the Communist Party, or their investors, their wealthy residents, owns about $1 trillion of United States debt, U.S. bonds.
Yes.
What are they going
Yes.
to do with it? That's a weapon that they can use against President Trump, is it not?
Yes, it is, Judge. And did you see what happens when the Japanese started to use it? When the Japanese started to move the bond market?
Well,
there was
the tariffs went away, or they went away everywhere except China.
Exactly, Judge. The American oligarchy freaked out completely. And obviously, they picked up the phone. They called Donald Trump and said, you have to stop this now because we are losing money, and a lot of money. So if the Chinese do that, it's going to be even worse. Okay, Japan has more U.S. Treasury bonds than China, but we are talking about almost in the case of Japan, is nearly $1 trillion. In the case of China, if I'm not mistaken, is around 800 and 150 billion. That's a lot of funds. If they start unloading this via they have direct connections with traders in Wall Street. The Chinese can pick up the phone and call their favorite traders in Wall Street and say, okay, go for it. They always, but this would be, I would say, the nuclear option. The Chinese are extremely.
This would force the American government to raise the interest it pays on these bonds, not only on future bonds, but on bonds that are already out there when they're rolled over. Most of them have a short shelf life. This would drain the American Treasury.
Absolutely. But at the moment, Judge, they are still not thinking about this possible nuclear option, which they are safeguarding it if they need to use it. They are talking about the opportunity that China has to expand even more their trade footprint all over the global south, the global majority, from their neighbors here in Asia to Africa to Latin America. And guess what? European chihuahuas are sending a delegation here in June to propose a better trade deal between the European Union and China.
Wow.
Can we all believe that? No, exactly.
What is the, if you can put your finger on it, the consensus about Donald Trump, whether we're talking cab drivers or academics?
A joke, a circus ringmaster, which is what this is the expression that I used in my column. Circus ringmaster in a Chinese way. The really hardcore Trump denomination at the moment, all across Chinese social media, Weibo, everywhere, is barbarian. And when a Chinese with 5,000 years of history calls an European or an American or Western a barbarian, that's the lowest of the lowest. So this is not good for the American president, but they keep treating Americans royally. There are a lot of American tourists here in downtown Shanghai or around the big towers here. I'm in the heart of the business center, and American businesses everywhere. American businessmen, you hear American accents everywhere. Continue to do business here, and American residents here, many of them are absolutely appalled, because they know that their business will end up suffering, of course. But the bulk of the Chinese, and here in Shanghai, to feel the spirit of Shanghai is amazing. This is electric in a New York style sense. And the electrification that we used to feel in New York in decades past, now you feel it here, even walking in the streets. It's an absolutely fascinating phenomenon. And you can feel it that you are in the capital of the future, and in the capital of the big superpower of the future. You feel it in your bones, and you feel it in the air.
Wow. Let me ask you about another of your fields that you examine closely, and that is the Kremlin. What is the Kremlin's reaction to Donald Trump's experimentations with
which is attributed sometimes to Sun Tzu, sometimes to Lao Tzu. I am by the side of the river and I'm watching the river flow, and sooner or later the cadaver of my enemy will be floating by. That's the Russian observing, not necessarily literally, of course, but they know that maybe there will be the cadaver of a unilateral order floating by the river sooner rather than later. But at the same time, Judge, they are involved in this immensely complex negotiation of trying to solve the Ukrainian riddle. And at the moment, the mood in Moscow and the mood in the Kremlin is relatively upbeat. We don't know what's going to happen next.
You know, Steve Witkoff said just the other night, it may have been last night on Fox News, that he met with President Putin for 5 hours. Now, Witkoff is not a professional diplomat. 5 hours is a long time to be negotiating with Vladimir Putin. And the negotiations were on other bigger matters than just the Ukraine war. This is right up Donald Trump's alley, who, notwithstanding the ignorance he manifested by imposing the tariffs, nevertheless understands the benefits to the world of a reset, a commercial reset, as well as a political and military one between the United States and Russia.
Absolutely correct. A commercial reset, a geopolitical reset, and spheres of influence. There's no question that Putin explained to Witkoff in detail, 5 hours. Look, we're going to have a sort of Yalta 2.0 sooner or later. There's going to be you, us, and the Chinese. And we're going to define spheres of influence. We know our spheres of influence very well in the post-Soviet space. We don't want to infringe on your spheres of influence, let's say in the Atlanticist nexus, or even in the Americas. But you have to respect our spheres of influence. And in terms of China, you have to respect China in Asia. China is the big Asian superpower, and you have to respect that. The only leader in the world who can tell that to Trump directly, for the moment, indirectly via Witkoff, is Putin.
Right.
Absolutely.
The neocons reject that. I mean, that's the core of their existence, is that America must be dominant and Chinese influence and Russian influence must shrink. So Trump is turning a battleship or an aircraft carrier 180 degrees on a dime, because he's dealing with an establishment, those neocons, his Secretary of State, his Secretary of Defense, his Director of CIA, his National Security Advisor, his people closest to him. He's dealing with the heart and soul of neocons.
Absolutely, Judge. And he's dealing with the heart and soul of the neocon silos of power all across the deep state, in every different area of the deep state. And they are over, and they won't let go. And they won't let go of exceptionalism. In terms of the Americans, the Monroe Doctrine, they will never let it go. And of course, unilateral domination and what we say go, our way or the highway. You cannot do our way or the highway with both Russia and China.
Got it.
And maybe some of these silos are starting to, read the tea leaves. And Trump, we can even say, Judge, that his domestic challenges coming from these silos in the deep state, they are even more hardcore than his international challenges, which, from the point of view of the American system, are this triad, what I call the new Primakov triangle: Russia, Iran, and China. Updating what Yevgeny Primakov at the late 90s said was the beginning of the RIC, India at the time. Nowadays, Iran is much more powerful and significant than India. India is still on the fence. They don't know if they're going to be a colony of the Anglo-Americans or if they're going to be part of the Eurasia integration. Not even the Indian elites know where they're going next. But this new Primakov triangle with Russia and China, and also, let's say, they've got Iran's back. The war, or the overall framing of the war by Trump so far, is against these three, which happens to be three BRICS, and the top three BRICS in terms of importance. But the deep state and his enemies inside the deep state, they see these three as total threats against American domination, so they must be smashed geoeconomically and geopolitically. It's absolutely impossible. And many of these silos are imposing on Trump. You have to destroy China geoeconomically. You have to destroy Iran militarily. And any accommodation with Russia, no, we're going to say how much you can accommodate with Russia.
Pepe Escobar, my dear friend, I misspoke earlier when I said you're in Beijing. You're in the heart of the Chinese commercial development in Shanghai, where more construction goes on there in that city than in most countries in the world. Thank you very much.
It's electric.
Night. Thank you very much for accommodating our time, my man. We'll talk to you again
My
next week.
pleasure.
All the best.
You know that, very funny, Judge. Do you know that my server on my VPN at the moment is called USA for China 3?
Wow. I would say only in America, but it wouldn't make
Only
sense.
in America.
Thank you, Pepe.
Oh, sorry. Let me put this one up here. Taiwan still, good to see you. Let me do a quick headlines here. I only have two for you quickly here. Then we move into our conversation here. Well, the first one that I came across has to do with, of course, none other than Trump. But this one has to do with sort of his diplomatic tensions with Pretoria, which is South Africa. Why? Because Donald Trump threatened to boycott the G20 summit, which is scheduled in November. Well, who gives a damn whether the US attended G20 or not? And second, really, ask yourself, guys, how relevant G20 is. I know there are some heavy hitters inside that G20, but think about it. So if the US threatened not to attend, so what? So I'm not surprised that if those G20 summit decide to move forward, because here is the hard truth, is that the world has moved on. Whether it's going to move on with the US or without is irrelevant at this point. That's just the way I see it. Second headlines, it's from our neighbor to the north, which was shocking to me, to my fellow Canadian watchers here. What you're looking at is the picture of, he turns out to be another sort of, I don't know what's the term, pathetic. This is the conservative leader for in Canada. And that's the Conservative Party, that is, the leader of the Conservative Party, Pierre Poilievre. I'm sorry, Pierre Poilievre. So here is what he did say. He pledged now, listen to this, he pledged, as of this weekend, he pledged to deport foreigners who incite hatred, claiming that rallies organized by pro-Palestinian protesters contribute to the rise of anti-Semitism. I mean, just think about it, guys, especially for my fellow Canadian viewers. Pathetic. We used to say Canada was the best for freedom of speech. None. across the Western world. As a matter of fact, here is the hard truth. Here in the US, Donald Trump now is going to impose a new policy regarding citizenship that if you criticize Israel, you will not be granted citizenship. Really? Germany embarked on that. And now the US is going to do it. Makes you just wonder. So where this is headed. Anyway, so all right, let's get into our topic here regarding the US-Iran indirect talks that have took place on Saturday. I know I was going to do it yesterday, but I just couldn't. So before I move on here, guys, please, if this is your first time on this channel, I will greatly appreciate if you could subscribe. I'm going to put the link for you in the description, because the analysis you are hearing is unique to this channel here. So I would greatly appreciate if you could support the channel by subscribing and sharing it with others from around the world, so they, like you, have an opportunity to hear the truth. And thank you for your support. Now, when we talk about the talks that just took place on Saturday and took place in Oman, and especially in the capital Muscat. Now, those talks were indirect. Let me just make this clear for you guys. There was no direct conversation between the US and Iran. So despite what you see on some YouTube stuff, whatever, I don't see that stuff anyway. But anytime you see a headline that says direct talks, that's not true. And that's why I'm here to decipher facts from fiction, per se. So now, when you think about this talk, as a matter of fact, guys, why don't we do a little bit of geography and a little bit of history about Oman? A lot of people have no idea with their country, where this country is located to begin with. So let me share a map with you, if you allow me here. Then I'll do a little bit of history and a little bit of geography, and we'll move on with what we need to do. So here's the map here for Oman. Now, don't confuse Oman with Amman. Amman is the capital of Jordan. Oman is the country of Oman, that is. So Oman is some sort of a sovereign nation, of course, located in the Arabian Peninsula of West Asia, and is, of course, located in the northern and eastern hemispheres of the earth. Oman shares a northwestern border with the United Arab Emirates, a western border with Saudi Arabia and Yemen. Oman also shares a coastline borders with the Arabian Sea in the south and east, along with the Gulf of Oman in the northeast. Oman is strategically situated at the mouth of the Persian Gulf. Makes it very, very interesting, in the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula. And the country shares its maritime borders with Pakistan and Iran. So when you look at it right here, I'm scrolling this down here. Excuse me. So this is the Arabian Sea, and that's where Oman is. So if you look at it, very, very strategic location regarding Oman. So, okay, I'm gonna stop sharing this one here. There we go. Now let's do a really brief history about Oman, so you at least put it in perspective for you. Now, if you think about Oman, it goes way back to the Paleolithic era, which is through the archaeological evidence and also the evidence of the human habitation that's dated almost, based on the archaeological evidence, that goes back about 100,000 years. And this, as I said, archaeological evidence reveals that it was some sort of a civilization at that time around the 3000 BCE, which is before Common Era. And it was known for one particular thing, is trade. That was known for that. So, and the region was also known for its irrigation system, because agriculture was very, very important at that time. So, and the agriculture, it wasn't because of the Omanis, it was established by none other than Persian, because the Persians were there. So, And that was the sort of a crucial for sustaining this cultural civilization. So now, Oman is known for its tribal system, which is known in the region of West Asia, in Iraq, Syria, you name it, Jordan, and so forth. So, but once you start having the Arab migration from the South Arabian during the 2nd century CE, that's when you see the involvement of the emergence of Oman. Of course, Oman emerged to the scene in the 7th century. Why? Because that's when it embraced Islam, leading to its rise as a dominant maritime power. And by the 18th century, the Omani Sultanate, it's known also in Arabic as Sultanate Oman or the Omani Sultanate, has become a powerful empire, believe it or not. It was back then. And this is where it was competing with none other than the Portuguese and the British. So, and where the competition took place? In none other than the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. Because when you think about the location of Oman with access to both Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. So here is the key thing about history, is that the Omani naval forces expelled the Portuguese. They were able to defeat the Portuguese. Yeah. And they were able to expel them from their Eastern African possessions. And this is where Oman expanded all the way to none other than Zanzibar. And if you know where Zanzibar is, it's in Africa and other parts of the region. So at its peak, the Omani Empire influenced, the Omani Empire's influence sort of stretched all the way from the Strait of Hormuz all the way to the East African coast. That's how. Then you move forward to the 1970s. That's when, and I have some pictures for you guys that I need you to see. I'm going to be sharing with them. This is Qaboos. He was the king, the Sultan. They call him Sultan Qaboos. He died way back. So in 1970, Qaboos ascended to the throne and initiated some sort of a period of modernization. So that's how he opened up the country and so forth. Now, one thing you need to know about Oman, he has oil. So, of course, the discovery of oils in Dhofar, there is a region in Oman called Dhofar, which was discovered in 1964. And that's provided significant economic boost, further driving the country towards modernization. Now, what happened in 1960s? The Dhofar rebellion. A rebellion took place in 1960s and 1970s, which was suppressed with the military support from various countries. This is a key for you to know, the influence of outside powers. And this was a significant challenge to the Oman's territorial integrity. So, and that's where Oman continued to navigate this kind of changes, moving forward along with the developments of the country. I have a link for you. I'm going to share it with you guys. Very, very well detailed. I'm not going to go through it all of it here. This is Haytham. He is the current Haytham bin Tariq Al Said, which succeeded to the throne on the death of his cousin Qaboos, because Qaboos did not have a son who can ascend to the throne. So his cousin Haytham is the one who took over. This is Qaboos with Elizabeth. That's because Britain played a role in influencing Oman at that time. So that is the reason why I wanted to just share this with you quickly here. And I'll provide you a link of this. Let me share it with you guys right now, so you can, pardon me, read up on it later on, should you decide to do so. All right, let's move on into our conversation here regarding the talks that took place between the indirect talks between the United States and Iran. Now, first of all, let me tell you something here. The location where the talks took place, both parties were not in the same room. they were in different halls. Let me just make that clear. So, because the talks were located in separate halls. That's one. Second, if it was any proposition or suggestions or whatever, it has to go through the representative of Oman, who will disclose that to their side and vice versa. And it was the foreign minister of Iran, Iraqi, Abbas Iraqi, who represent Iran, and it was the Wierikoff, who represented the U.S. side. I have a picture of both of them right here. So just for me to clear this up, because a lot of people will under the impression that the U.S. has talked directly to Iran. No, it did not. So Oman played the mediator in exchange for these possessions regarding the nuclear program. So, and here is the thing: what the Iranians have sort of made it clear. One of the things is, first of all, is that the lifting of the illegal sanctions. That's one. So the US, on the other hand, is saying, well, the talks are moving in the right direction because they're going to be meeting again next Saturday on the 19th for the second round. But again, like I put on the thumbnail, are you going to trust the Americans? I mean, let's be honest about it. I'm talking about government, not the people. So now there is one incident that took place in which, towards the end, there were a few minutes of a direct talks between the two delegates or representatives with the presence of the Omani foreign minister before leaving the sort of the talks venue altogether. A minute or two here, it doesn't make any sense at all. But again, you think about all this in terms of what should we expect? Should we expect cooperation from Iran and vice versa? Most likely not the case. As I argued, and I'm going to be sharing with you some excerpt, guys, to put things in perspective. It is what I argued back then in my book. I find it unrealistic for Washington to expect full cooperation from Iran as it contains it. Iran challenged the West and successfully overcame the sanctions imposed on it for over 30 years. So what makes US policymakers confident that a containment policy will achieve its objectives? The same argument I'll make about China. So, alas, Iran and the Middle East, for that matter, never cease to surprise us. Whatever the outcome may be, given the challenges ahead and the inherent dangers, should this policy fail to achieve its objectives, the United States should be prepared to live with a nuclear Iran as it does with Pakistan and India. The only difference is that a nuclear Iran will shadow the security architecture of the Middle East that never cease to surprise us, forcing world powers to change their strategy on a short notice. This is what I argued before. And this is my point. As to if Iran, to me, that if Iran would have moved forward with the nuclear stuff, we won't have these talks. It's the same argument that I've made regarding North Korea. Tell me if the US will dare to threaten North Korea. And I'm going to get into North Korea soon because that's part of this conversation I'm going to be, or the analysis rather, that I'm going to be sharing with you. So now, of course, both parties, I'm not saying just the Americans, but the Iranians also have argued that the statements that the talks were sort of constructive and took place in and I'm quoting here. The talks were constructive and took place in a calm and respectful atmosphere. End of quote. So, however, let's be realistic. They didn't see any progress whatsoever. Of course, it is expected. It's the first round. But I bet you this, because the Iranians already are suspicious of the intentions of the Americans, because they have been fooled once. Like the saying goes, we have the saying here: "For me once, shame on you. For me twice, shame on me." So Iranians will have to be careful with this. So, and that's to me where this idea of you have to be careful about how this is going to move forward. You know, here is where I have to disclose the truth about the lies emanating from Washington. Here is what Washington said, and even President Trump himself saying that Washington has repeatedly described the talks as direct. First of all, the talks weren't direct, even if they meant direct, meaning in an honest way, but they used the term very specifically to leave you confused, because direct here can mean two things: either direct face to face with the individual, or direct as far as being straightforward. So, but in this case, they meant, meaning Washington, meant that the talk were direct with Iran. And here is why: because Iran came back and Iran insists that they are indirect, which means the talks. And that tells you right there, US wanted to present this idea that we have pressured Iran into direct talks. No, Iran, like I said before, and I know there were some videos out there from some YouTubers, they have no idea what they're talking about. This is why, again, as for our community, I have to protect the community from misleading information. Iran has never capitulated to the American pressure. However, Iran never said we will never enter into indirect negotiations. What Iran said, under the terms of the Ali Khamenei, said we will never enter into direct talks with the Americans, but they left the door open for indirect talks. And this is where this idea of the so-called positive and constructive talks, in part. Let me play a clip for you guys from what Donald Trump said regarding the talks, and let you reach your own conclusion for this one. Take a listen here, please.
Iran wants to deal with us, but they don't know how. They really don't know how. We had a meeting with them on Saturday.
I disagree with the president. Iran knows how to deal with the Americans. It's not they don't know how.
We have another meeting scheduled next Saturday. I said, that's a long time. You know, that's a long time. So I think they might be tapping us along.
No, it is not tapping you along. It's because they don't trust you. That is the reason why.
But Iran has to get rid of the concept of a nuclear weapon. They cannot have a nuclear weapon. He can't have a nuclear weapon. Nobody can have. We can't have anybody having nuclear weapons. You know, we can't have nuclear weapons.
Here is the problem with that. Who are you to dictate to countries who have a nuclear weapon or not? But here is the thing, guys. Can Trump say this about North Korea? He can't.
And I think they're tapping us along because we're so used to dealing with stupid people in this country. And I had Iran perfect. You had no attacks. You would have never had October 7th.
That's a misleading information. Iran had nothing to do with the October 7th and Hamas and so forth. That just Trump doesn't know. He just flip-flopping whatever. So that's not true.
In Israel, the attack by Hamas, because Iran was broke. They were stone cold.
Iran is not broke, Mr. President. You don't know what you're talking about.
Broke when I was president, and I don't want to do it. I want them to be a rich, great nation. The only thing is one thing, simple. It's really simple. They can't have a nuclear weapon, and they got to go fast. because they're fairly close to having one. And they're not going to have one. And if we have to do something very harsh, we'll do it. And I'm not doing it for us, I'm doing it for the world. And these are
I have to disagree with that. You're not doing it for the world. You're doing it for Israel. Let's be honest about it.
to radicalize people, and they cannot have a nuclear weapon.
All right, I'm going to stop right there, guys. And just to highlight to you once again, the idea of what Mr. Trump is saying regarding, because to me, it's nonsense. And here is why, nonsense. It's because you have to consider the changes that's taking place around the world, geopolitically speaking. So with what the president is saying, as far as, oh, we are not going to have Iran allow it nuclear weapons, you think about two things here. If Iran moved forward with the bomb, whether they have it or not, that's beside the point. But they just, maybe they didn't want to come forward and disclose they have. That's the same thing North Korea did. Did North Korea ever declare we have a nuclear weapon? No, they didn't. But we know better. We know better to never threaten North Korea, because they will respond. So now here is the thing I need you to understand. There are those who argue, geopolitical analysts, that argue that maybe a deal between the US and Iran could be a good one. I'm not denying that. The possibility is there. But again, I'm using history as my guide. What makes me think that the US can hold its end of the bargain? But there is more into that. When you think about the shifting geopolitical landscape around the world, because you're going to have to think about where the US is and where Iran is going to be regarding this new multipolar order. So the thing is, if we are to ask ourselves, and this is where my analysis comes in as far as thinking pragmatically, will Iran be ready for war? My answer is yes. Will they want a war? My answer is no. So why? Because it doesn't make any sense to engage into a war with the United States. Why? It's not about fear. It's not about being scared of the US. It's about the shifting global order. The US is on decline. Give the US another decade and you see. Iran is thinking in these terms of, why fight when the US is already in decline? It's going down on its own slightly. And it will, this hegemony that we are known for, it's diminishing. Look now what's going on with Asia. Look what's going on with China. You know, you just think in these terms. So the other aspects of all this is that when this is about just Iran, I'll get into the US. On Iran side, Iran will have to ask itself, with the shift in geopolitical and multipolarity, what role will Iran play into that? And this is again where Iran has to think very hard of its strategic moves. The war versus your role on the global geopolitical landscape. So that is one of the aspects of it. Because here is the thing. If a war will ensue between the US and Iran, what's going to happen? You know, the infrastructure of Iran will be decimated. So, and again, if that is decimated, what role would you play on the new multipolar order? That's just the way I see it. That's just the way I see it. So Iran, while it's make it clear that they are ready for war should it happen, they prefer not to. And once again, not because they are scared of the Americans. They are not. And I'm going to share some clips with you about some types of missiles. They just been disclosed recently, as of 3 days ago. I think 3 or 4 days ago. This is from Iran side. Now you think about the American side. What does a war mean with Iran? It will be costly. I mean, you look at now how much we spent so far against the Houthis. Over $1 billion. Did we defeat the Houthis? No. And we will not. We will not. Second thing, what a war with Iran is going to do to the American economy. Because remember, should Iran start to be attacked, they're going to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. You're done with access to oil. That's one. And as you know, energy, if you want a vital economy, you have to have access to energy. So the other aspects of it from the American side is that you get engaged against a formidable enemy, Iran in this case, because Iran is not Iraq, Iran is not Afghanistan. Iran is has a strong military. You know what that's going to do to you, meaning the American days. It will only precipitate and accelerate our decline, because we already saw the outcome in Afghanistan. We saw the outcome in Iraq. And that is why, if that to happen, what is going to be for the rest of the world is going to be doing? They're going to be pivoting away from the US into the East. Simple as that. And I'm already seeing the signs for it. So even Europeans themselves are in talks with China. And by the way, the Chinese president is currently in Hanoi, in Vietnam. He's going to go to Cambodia, and after that to Malaysia. And I will be addressing this with my guest Einar Tengen tomorrow. So, and this is exactly where you see this reflection of the changing of the global order. This is why the US will have to think twice. So, and this is why these talks are talking about now the de-escalation of tensions. We have no gut for fighting. We can't fight. I've already talked about this so many times. You know, suffice it to say, for Iran, and again, I go back to that point, what would have happened if they went ahead and declared, you know what, we are in possession of a nuclear weapon? Or you compare, because when I wrote the Iran book, I wrote about 3 scenarios that Iran could pursue. They could pursue the same way like North Korea, like Pakistan, like India. Of course, the example of Libya won't work, and I'm gonna detail a little bit of this one here about it. Let me share another excerpt. I have about 4 excerpts that I'm going to share with you from my book. The other alternative of U.S. foreign policy establishment has at its disposal is to learn to live with an armed nuclear Iran, as it does with Pakistan, India, and North Korea. Under no circumstances am I simplifying this dangerous alternative. Rather, I am being pragmatic in questioning what else the US can do against Iran, which survived harsh sanctions for over 30 years. Despite the restrictions imposed upon it, it was able to influence the outcome. Furthermore, regardless of how much of a pariah it continues to be, because that's what we say, Iran continues to march forward towards expanding its sphere of influence in a region known for its shifting loyalties and allegiances. So let me share a clip with you here, guys, quickly again, to highlight to you something very, very important I need you to see. What I'm going to do is I'm going to silence the sound, or I'll give credit to, this is for crooks, news. The sound belongs to them. So I just need to give credit where credit is due. Sorry, guys. Take a look and take a listen. All right. Now, here is what it says right there. Most advanced ballistic missiles and rockets inside an underground facility or complex.
هر هر هفته یه رونمایی از یه شهر موشکی داشته باشیم، هر هفته تا 2 سال دیگه تموم نمیشه.
Okay, I just wanted to share this with you for you guys to see and get an idea of where things are moving forward. So, and this is why when we think about those indirect talks between Iran and the United States, you have to think in terms of what are they trying to do here? So what is the U.S. objective? Well, the U.S. already said that they will not allow Iran's nuclear program and all that. Even though you and I know this is not about the U.S. like what Trump said for the rest of the world. No, it's not about the world. It's about Israel. Simple as that. So, and this is where I am thinking in terms, you know, what would have happened if Iran would have pursued the path that India and Pakistan did? Because remember, especially for Pakistan ended up having a nuclear weapon under the nose of the U.S. intelligence community. They had no clue. This is why till today, the U.S. intelligence community is itching to know at least a sense of where the locations of the nukes are. But the ISI, the Inner Service Intelligence in Pakistan, will never share that info with the Americans because they don't trust the Americans. That simple as is that. So, and this is why you think about in terms of what would have happened if Iran would have moved into that direction. So, even though, as I argued back then, that, and I remember arguing that if Iran's nuclear program is reported to the UN Security Council, which it was, then you start to think in terms of both academia and international security analysts were asking whether the case of Iran would be fairly approached, judged, and dealt with in an international system that is sort of marked by inconsistencies. That is where the challenge is. The other argument was that this has to do with questions of legitimacy, specifically since Iran is a signatory member of the NPT. So that means what? It is within its right to pursue civilian nuclear technology, which the US is trying to prevent it. And that is why I'm saying the international system approach to Pakistan and India when they tested nuclear weapons exposed the flaws inherited within the language of the NPT itself. So that is where I used to argue for the case of, and I did this so many times regarding my presentations about Iran when I did because I did a presentation, I remember, for the military entity to address this particular aspect of this. Let me share another clip with you here. Hold on a second here. Let me share it on the screen with you. Once again, just show the disclosure of certain new attack systems. I will give credit to
و دارایی‌های ما قادر هستیم که اینها رو مورد هجوم واقع بدیم.
Now, here is the thing: the deployment of these weapons, of course, that's because of the tensions with they are not taking any chances. They are preparing. And that is the one that Iran unveiled. Oh, let me hold on a second. Right there, Iran unveiled new missile systems on 3 strategic islands in the Gulf. That's as of March 23 last month. So my point is once again is to highlight to you the idea of how this is going to move forward. So now we ought to ask ourselves one particular question. If the US is really honest about these talks, which I don't believe, I don't trust Washington anymore. So it's because we become so corrupted anyway. But here's the thing, because we have to think pragmatically here. We can't think emotionally here. So. And that's a question for you guys. Please answer yes or no. Depends on what you know. In your opinion, do you believe the US will come up with some concessions regarding the talks? In other words, will the US agree to give up on certain things? Yes or no? Let me see in the chat box what your answer is. Karakul, say no. Alistalokin, you say no. Zhao Yang, you say probably. Hanging G, you say no. Army with Harmony, you say yes. Truth Seeker, you say no. Dave H, you say yes. YT, not likely. Masian Dorcia, you say no. Rampel Sawan, you say no. Ali, you say no. Kevin, you say, I believe they won't have a choice. Nodika, you say no. Amjad, you say no. Matt Backy, you say yes, but very little in order to get enrichment material out of Iran. Those are good points. I will have to lean more towards no, because if concessions that the US is going to make, they will be irrelevant to Iran. Because here's the thing: to put the US on the test of truth, ask them if they will lift sanctions, complete sanctions, because we imposed unilateral sanctions. Most likely they won't. And this is where, again, you have to think about, and that's what's reported here in the US by Axios. As a matter of fact, he quoted a US official saying that Trump is willing to make concessions in order to reach a peaceful settlement with Iran. I just don't trust the guy. How can you do this when you say, well, first of all, there will be no program whatsoever. Second thing, you're going to move into talking about Iran missile technologies. So I just don't buy it. I don't buy it. So this is why I am coming to the conclusion, guys, and this is my opinion, that these talks, the indirect talks that took place, is nothing but noise. No more, no less. There is nothing of substance. Yes, it might be the first round. We'll be seeing the second one this coming Saturday. We'll see. And I'm going to keep up on this and keep you updated on this one here. So regarding, again, how things will move forward. But again, if we are to talk about what is the objective of the Americans, what is the objective of the Iranians? For the Iranians, the sole objective is to secure its national interest, which is rightly so. Makes perfect sense. It's because Iranians are thinking in terms, how about if we give diplomacy a chance to resolve the nuclear issue? But for the US to say, you can't have any program whatsoever, even though Iran is part of the NPT, which means they have a right to nuclear technology, civilian use, that is. But again, we forced them into enriching uranium at a higher level because we broke the rule. We broke the contract. What do you expect? I still believe if Iran would have moved forward, we won't be having this conversation today. The same way North Korea did. So let me share once again an excerpt with you from my book in which I addressed the military aspects. A lot of people have no idea. Here is what I wrote back then. Before addressing Iran's military capabilities, one must shed light on its military historical strength. Doing so paints a clear picture of elements that assist Iran in sustaining the strength of its military apparatus. Of interest in this discussion is how, despite the changes in global geopolitics, mainly the end of the Cold War, Iran remained committed to disallowing the political changes on the global landscape to impact its military readiness. While many countries, be they in the West or in the East, reorganized their military structure, number of troops, and so forth, Iran did not follow a similar path. The reason is that Iran's continued concern over and perceived the threats from hostile nations, including the United States and the United Kingdom, convinced Iran military leadership to maintain military readiness and high troop numbers. That's exactly what I argued back then. And it turns out to be right in the sense of why Iran sort of stick to its strategy that you can't trust the West, you can't trust the British, you can't trust the Americans, you can't trust the collective West, all of them. And it turns out to be right. So now this leads me to talk about a historical one about Libya, because I argued in my Iran book what would have happened if Iran pursued the same path that Libya did. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Libya. Here is a picture here. This is from the Libyan nuclear program. And the reason why I wanted to talk briefly about this, because I am very familiar with it. What's the word? I was aware of the talk behind closed doors regarding the dismantling of the Libya nuclear program. And that's all I can say about that. So here is the thing. Here's what you need to understand. So how did Libya's program came about? Well, of course, because it started back in about the 1964, if you have to go back to that era. So, and it was right at the heart of the Cold War. And of course, the regional competition for influence that took place at that time. So, and that's when the late Gaddafi sought to possess nuclear weapons to ensure his survival and enhance Libya's status as a regional power in North Africa and West Asia. And he was, because remember, what was the reason for why we took Gaddafi out? Does anybody know? We're not talking about the nuclear program, because the nuclear program was dealt with in 2003, and it ended in 2004. As I said, I was aware of the details of it. So, but what is the reason why we took out Gaddafi? Does anybody know? If you can type in the chat box, in one word, if you could. Geez, you guys. Matt Becky, you got it. The currency. Who else? Someone else. Gold dinar, al-Stalokin. Francis Tango, that is correct. Kevin, that is correct. Athene Wu, drop the dollar. You're absolutely correct, guys. And that was the reason why we end up having to take him out, because Libya's oil, first of all, was a high quality. And all of Europe, all the jets in Europe depend on the oil from Libya because it's a high quality. But it was the gold standard where where Libya have argued for dumping the dollar and using the gold instead of and creating a currency in Libya. In Africa, but Africans were corrupted, still to some degree, some countries, not all. But that was the reason why the decision was made to take out Gaddafi at the time. But regarding Libya's nuclear program, you think about it, because it started back in late 70s. That's when, before witnessing a significant milestone during that. And that is why, as a matter of fact, the accomplishments that was achieved in the Libyan program was in support by Pakistan. So at that time, it was none other than Abdul Qadir Khan is considered the father of the Pakistani nuclear program. At the same time, when Pakistan and India developed a nuclear, it was too late for the US to do anything whatsoever. And this is again what I'm saying regarding regarding Iran. I'm sorry. If Iran would have moved forward with this, we won't be having this conversation, because the US will have to think twice. This is why they're trying. Now, don't get me wrong. I will not be surprised. I will not be surprised if to the last minute, Iran could surprise the world by saying, dare you to attack us because we will deploy our nukes. I won't be surprised. And again, I've seen enough in my life regarding this kind of issues. And once again, I go to the example of North Korea. I just go to that example. Here is one of the ranges of North Korea. Take a look at that, guys. And we give credit here to CNS. That's their slide there. Look at this last one here. 13,000 kilometers. You all know what it means. So, of course, all the troops in South Korea and Japan will be wiped out, but this 13,000 kilometer ballistic will reach the US. And this is why we have to think twice about threatening, because have you ever seen the language that we use against Iran? We are using it against North Korea? No, we won't. We won't. And that's what I'm saying. The possibility is there. And again, I won't be surprised. I've seen some surprises in my life regarding the geopolitical changes and so forth. I won't be surprised to the last minute Iran might shock the world with something. For now, this is what it is. They're trying to go the diplomatic way. It is my belief that Iran does not want to play all its cards, does not want to show all its cards. And it's a smart move. Why should they do that? And again, they might surprise the world. So we shall see. We shall see. So, all right, guys, this is what I have to share with you. I'm going to share a link with you here.
Hi, everybody. Today is Monday, April 14th, 2025, and our friend Larry Johnson is back with us. Welcome back, Larry.
Hi there. What happened to January? Good God. I'm getting old, man. Time's flying too fast.
Larry, let's get started with the talks between Iran and the United States. And I know that you wrote a piece on your website, and you've mentioned one of the options, one of the outcomes could be some sort of talks out of those. Just the United States was talking about attacking Iran. Iran said they're not gonna, this way they're not gonna negotiate with the United States. But right now they're getting together. They're talking to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And here is what Pete Hegseth said about the talks.
At direct talks yesterday, they began. In the past, it's been indirect talks with a mediator, but there's Steve Witkoff meeting with the foreign minister of Iran. What can you tell us?
Well, I can tell you that President Trump is dead serious on this issue. He's dead serious that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. He's said that for 20 years. He's been consistent. That is clear. He's dead serious that he wants it done at the negotiating table. He wants it done peacefully. Yeah. And that's why he's going straight to these talks. He set that deadline. These were productive talks yesterday. I don't want to get ahead of our skis. Steve Witkoff does a fantastic job, but it was a good step, and they're gonna go at it again on Saturday. But he's also dead serious that if we can't figure this out at the negotiating table, then there are other options, to include my department, to ensure that Iran never has a nuclear bomb. We hope we never get there. We really do, Maria. But what we're doing with the Houthis and what we're doing in the region, we've shown a capability to go far, to go deep, and to go big. And again, we don't want to do that, but if we have to, we will, to prevent the nuclear bomb in Iran's hand.
Go ahead.
But you know, Nima, I'm dead serious about being dead serious, because if I can't be dead serious, then I'm not seriously dead. But the more that I'm dead, then I'm serious. He's a moron. Good God. Oh, we don't want to get ahead of our skis. No, Pete, the expression is out over your skis. You should try skiing once in a while. Look, I predicted one of three possible outcomes. Number one is after a half hour, an hour, they would have questioned the sexuality of each other's mothers and said insulting things and stormed out. Well, that didn't happen. Option two was they'd talk, they'd realize that they would have something to talk about and would agree to meet again in the near future, you know, and maybe even announce the next day, which is what they did. The third option was that they started talking and they extended the talks, and then they came out and said, you know, we're going to continue this tomorrow. So that would have been the best outcome. What they've done now, Witkoff comes back. He's going to brief Trump. Hey, here's what we talked about. Here's what we agreed on. Here's where I think there's the possibility of an agreement. And then at that point, the Zionist loons, the crazies, the Israel firsters are going to descend on Trump like a bunch of hungry chickens on a group of bugs. They just peck away. And right now, it appears that the deal Trump was willing to accept would be getting Iran to reduce its level of uranium enrichment, and by guarantees and inspections that they were not working at all on a nuclear weapon. And I think the Russians is, part of Witkoff's confidence with dealing with the Iranians, and this came out of the talks and the preceded by a day in Moscow. That one of the items I guarantee Putin talked to him about was the relationship that Russia has with Iran and Russia's commitment to not seeing the proliferation of nuclear weapons. And that deal doesn't call for what Israel wants. Israel wants the Libyan option. Basically, they want all the Iranians to be anally raped, okay? Disarmed so that they can't defend themselves, betrayed so that the West can do whatever it wants to it. And, they specifically want Iran to get rid of its missiles, dismantle all, even, peaceful nuclear energy projects, which is ridiculous, and to cut off all ties with the Houthis, Hamas, and Hezbollah. Now, Iran said, no, we're not doing that. What I'm not sure that Trump and the Mario Rubios, the Michael Waltz hawks in his group understand is that this coordination between Iran with Russia and China has been going on 3 weeks. They started first in Beijing. I think you and Pepe talked about that. And then it was followed up last week with another session. They weren't getting together to discuss, hey, who's got a good price on a rug? Oh, I tell you what, you give me that rug and I'll give you this nice little doll. No, they were talking about what each country was willing to do, maybe even recommending negotiating strategies to Iran, how to approach it. Anyway, what happened on Saturday was the talks were productive. Now the ball is in Donald Trump's court, as I wrote on Saturday. This thing could still fall apart. And if it falls apart, I think Trump remains committed to going to war with Iran. This is, this isn't the world of rationality. We're not talking people who are logical and dealing with facts. This is entirely the range of religious fanaticism and the desire to protect Israel at all costs. Just notice the irony. Today, you've got all of Europe condemning Russia, and the United States condemning Russia because they killed 60 officers who had gathered at a public building, and there may have been some civilian casualties. What do they say about the Palestinians? Not a goddamn word. Nothing. They murder, the Zionists murder women and children on a daily basis. And it's not a matter of we believe, we can see the images, they're horrific. And the West sits silently by. But Russia, who's being attacked by the West, Russia has every good lawful reason under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter to declare war on Europe and the United States and bomb the hell out of us. They don't do that. So they're prosecuting this as they call it, the special military operation to accomplish particular goals. And when you listen to Trump say, if Iran doesn't negotiate, if Iran doesn't make a deal, there's gonna be hell to pay. He loves to use that. I guess everybody in the Trump administration is assigned a new phrase they get to use. Trump, hell to pay. Pete Hegseth, I'm dead serious. I'm dead serious here, Nima. That, our military power, we can go in there and wipe out Iran. And then I raise my hand and go, question. You started your military attack on the Houthis on March 15th. It's now 30 days. How's that going? Oh, yeah, that's right. The Houthis just shot down their fourth Predator in 2 weeks, which some press says that those are 50 million a pop, but I've internet searches I've done says 30 million. So if the United States, with the greatest fighting military machine in the world, don't you know, because when Donald Trump talks about it, he's dead serious, hasn't been able to stop the Houthis. And no, it's 16 months. But yet they're going to go wipe out Iran in 2 bombing runs. God, I mean, this is what the Ray McGovern would call delusional male bovine excrement. It's delusional MBE. Just crazy.
Larry, you mentioned the fight with Houthis and with Yemenis. Here is what the commander of the U.S. Special Operations said about the way that they're fighting Yemen.
Use $10,000 one-way drones that we shoot down with $2 million missiles. That cost benefit.
Yeah. Just a little bit thinking the way that they're fighting Yemen. I think that's why one of the part of this sort of operation is the economic part of the operation. Is that going to benefit the United States in a long run? The way that he's describing here is not sustainable. The way that they're fighting Yemen.
Well, just because we love to borrow money and spend money we don't have and enrich the military-industrial complex, what's wrong with that? Nima, why do you hate America?
I don't actually.
No, look, I'm saying that is, that's one of the charges that when you try to point out this stuff, the craziness, the contradictions, the disparities, the disproportionalities, they always come back as, why do you hate America? What? You're telling us the truth. By God, we can't stand the truth. This is, you know, I don't know why people are surprised by this, at least in the United States. I've written about it extensively when it started and have said, look, this is something the United States cannot win or prevail without putting a 1 million-man army in the field and attacking and taking over Yemen. Now, people say, oh, they couldn't do that. Well, we couldn't do it anytime soon. It'd probably take us 5 years to get to that point to be ready to do that. And so it's not a practical solution. But without that practical solution, that would, cost God knows how many dead, and the financial costs on it be astronomical. This current approach of we're going to bomb, we're going to look for these missiles, we're going to try to spot where they're hidden, we're going to blow them up, and that'll end the threat. Well, Yemen's been at war now for like 10 years. A war that is against the West. Let's not kid ourselves that they've been indirectly fighting the United States now for 10 years. The U.S. loves these proxy wars, man. We go out and make other people die. We ruin the lives of other countries. So far, we haven't had to pay a price. But in the course of that, the Yemenis, the Houthis, dug underground deep. I'm sure they had consultations and advice and guidance from Iran and from North Korea. And so they've been able to build some very secure locations underground. And they got, particularly when you're dealing with all the mountains, good luck blowing through those mountains. And so the United States, its traditional method of using a fixed wing aircraft to locate a missile or a satellite flying overhead, said, "Hey, there it is." It's at the intersection of Broadway and 55th Street. So then you've got to relay that information through a bureaucracy, and it gets to the point where someone can make a decision and say, "Okay, yeah, we want to strike that. You got a green light, go." Well, who's going to do it? Are we going to launch a submarine launched ballistic missile? Are we going to launch a cruise missile, air launched cruise missile? Are we going to have a fighter jet fly off of the deck of so you got to make all those decisions. And so by the time you get the decision, say, okay, we're going to go hit there, missile's gone. They've moved it. It's a mobile launcher. They can drive it around, and we're not good at finding it and tracking it. Then that brings us, that's why they're using the Predators. Because the Predator, it's flying overhead, and as soon as it spots it, it can go, oh, there it is. It can fire. But it appears, I can't say this with 100% certainty, but it sure appears that the Houthis have figured this out, and they've developed, let's call it bait. They'll create some mobile launchers that aren't really launchers at all. They're just dressed up to look like it, and they'll drive it out into a particular area, and then they'll put some air defense systems nearby and just wait. Sort of like a deer hunter putting out a block of salt to attract the deer, and then they'll sit back there with the rifle, and as soon as the deer shows up, blam! You kill the deer, got your meat for 3 months. That appears to be what Yemen's doing. So the United States militarily is not going to prevail over Yemen with these tactics, despite all the nonsense about Mr. Dead Serious himself, Pete Hegseth.
Larry, I talked with Colonel Wilkerson, and he mentioned something about the Diego Garcia base.
Mm-hmm.
He said that he doesn't understand why they have chosen to use the Diego Garcia base, because it's defenseless. if they decide to go after Iran, to fight with Iran.
Yeah.
And yesterday we've learned that UAE is providing the fuel to the bombers and everything in Diego Garcia. Mostly is coming, mostly the fuel coming from the UAE. Iran can neutralize them in 2 hours, in a day.
Yeah, no, he's absolutely right. It's just, I think some people are making the mistake. They think that the United States has actually thought this through, planned this out, run the scenarios like I did, say scenario 1, scenario 2, scenario 3. If we do 1, what happens? If we do 2, what do we need to do differently? They're apparently not thinking that way. It's all emotion. And the frustration level for Trump's going to grow because they keep saying, "Oh, man, any day now, any day these Houthis are going to give up. Come on, give up." The Houthis, they've got a different timeline. In fact, I heard today that they launched 3 new missiles. Hypersonic missile attacks into Israel. One at Ben Gurion Airport, one at a military base. Yeah, they're not giving up. And they're not doing this because they're terrorists. That's Western propaganda. They're doing it because they're fighting on behalf of the people of Palestine. And they're not just fighting for Gaza. It is the West. The West excuses genocide in the name of fighting terrorism. And when you step back and look at the definition of terrorism is the use of violence against civilians for political purposes. The biggest terrorist in this right now is Israel, with the United States, its great enabler, given all of the civilians it's killing. But go ahead.
Yesterday they've hit the only functioning hospital in Gaza, Larry. And as you mentioned, nobody's talking about it. In Europe, they're just outraged by what's going on in Ukraine, and nobody's talking about the only hospital they're attacking. That
they're not human. It's okay to kill them. They're cockroaches. They're not human beings. They're Palestinians, for God's sake. They're not real people. I mean, you understand my sarcasm. It is, this is, if Hollywood or Bollywood, the Indian version of Hollywood, tried to make a movie about this, it would be so absurd. There's just we blithely ignore the tens of thousands of dead civilians, and then cry rivers of crocodile tears over the deaths of 10 civilians in Ukraine. Now, in Sumy, and good. I'm not suggesting that's good. But Russia, up to this point, has diligently tried to avoid civilian casualties. Whereas we've got a consistent evidence with respect to Ukraine of them attacking civilian targets without regard, that are not being used for military purposes. So a difference. But the war is cranked back up in Gaza now. The Israelis are killing Palestinians, and Hamas reportedly killed 2 Israelis today. And the Israeli military is already suffering a crisis internally, with a number of reservists now saying, "Hell no, I won't go. I'm not going to do this."
Laurie, when you look at Pete Hegseth and the way that he's expressing his feeling, I don't know if there is any strategy behind that, but
come on, come on, man, there's no strategy behind it.
He feels, Larry, feels like he's a political and military commentator instead of being the head of Pentagon.
He's
this
not
is
even.
a position,
Yeah.
a very important position from which he's talking, and he has to consider that. I don't know if he knows what's the meaning of prudent. What?
No, he does not. Couldn't spell it either, probably. You know, no, he's just he's a bobblehead. You know, those dolls that you got, you know, it's like a plastic body, and then there's a spring attached to the head, and the head does this. That's Hegseth. You got the Secretary of Defense bobblehead, but he's dead serious. Did I tell you? You know, I'm dead serious when I talk about this. I want you to understand. You know, I'm going to beat that to death because it reflects his inability to actually thoughtfully explain a policy. And again, they come up with this now. Oh, this is all about freedom of navigation in the Red Sea. No, it's not. This is about trying to help Israel maintain their genocide against the Palestinians. So this, you know, I know there's a lot of optimism surrounding the possibility of the United States and Iran talking, but you know what? Eve Smith reminded me, she's a very smart lady, that it was in the course of negotiations with Adam Hochstein talking to Nasrallah, and Nasrallah was meeting with his advisors to talk about what? A peace agreement. And the Israelis took advantage of that to kill him. So I don't put anything past this crew. This could be an entire charade on the part of the United States, foolishly thinking that they can defeat Iran militarily, that they can inflict so much pain on Iran that Iran would give up, and that Iran can't inflict any pain on the United States or its allies. Oh, heavens no, because we're the best in the world. You know, we keep telling ourselves lies. So it's just what's unfortunate with someone in Hegseth's position is you need somebody that's actually been in command of people in war. You know, he led a company. You know, big deal. He doesn't have the judgment. He doesn't have the fear to recognize that, you know, we could be making some choices and decisions here that will, if we make them, we can't go back and undo them. And it can all fundamentally alter the world as we know it. Because you've now got to take into consideration that Iran has a military, I'll call it what it is. It's a military alliance with China and Russia. It's written down with Russia. I'm not sure it's written down with China, but the aggressiveness of Trump, his attacks on China with the tariffs, you know, these people look at all of this as a whole. They're not saying, is the United States becoming more friendly, more cooperative, more helpful, or are they becoming a bigger son of a bitch every day and abusing us? You know, you tell me. What I see is abuse. What I see is, I don't see any one of these countries, including Russia, even though they're happy that they got some talks going with Witkoff and that they're moving on some of the trying to restore normal diplomatic relations. I don't think for a minute they believe that the United States can be trusted, is a stable, normal negotiating partner. I think you know, it's like dealing with an abusive father who's a drunk, and you hope to God he didn't come home drunk. Comes home drunk, he's hitting everybody. 1 minute, you know, if he's sober, he's okay, but then he gets drunk, and man, everything turns into a weapon. That's Donald Trump. His approach to life, and he got caught Friday night where they backed off of some of the tariffs on China. I mean, you could read what they said. It wasn't just the Wall Street Journal. It was announced through Homeland Security, and even the Commerce Secretary Lutnick said it. And then Trump goes, "No, we didn't. No, we didn't do that. No. Boy, it's in place." And then meanwhile, China says, "Okay, all these rare earth minerals that you need, that you don't have alternatives for. It's one thing to actually get the raw material, but then you got to get the process, the processing, and those factories can take 4 to 5 years to build." Okay, so China's holding a lot of cards here, and Trump's trying to pretend that we can bully China. So China's hearing that, and then China's seeing what they're trying to do with the Houthis, and this all comes together. United States, we look at it as episodes, separate episodes, not related. Chinese and Russians don't, and the Iranians certainly don't. They look at this as an integrated whole, and from that standpoint, the United States is the biggest threat to world peace today.
Considering the intensity and the roughness of the competition between the United States and China, last week I talked with Alex Craner. He said that with the current situation that the United States is in, and competing with China and what's going on with the conflict in Ukraine, if they go in Iran, if they decide to fight a war with Iran, that Iran would be the graveyard of the U.S. empire, because
I think he's right. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry to cut you off.
And I don't know if these people who are working with Donald Trump, like Hexet, like Marco Rubio, I don't know if they do have such a deep understanding of what's at risk for the United States if they start a new war.
No, they don't. They buy their own male bovine excrement. I mean, they really believe themselves. They believe we got the greatest, the bestest military in the world. Nobody's better than us, Nima. Look at all the wars we've run. Oh, that's right. We haven't run any since World War II. And when he talks about our great war fighters, what are they good at? They're good at killing unarmed civilians. They're good at bombing factories that don't have air defense. They're good at attacking countries that don't have air force. I mean, but we keep telling ourselves, I could be the greatest fighter in my street. I could be the king of my neighborhood, just as long as I only beat up all the kids. Make sure they're, younger than 12 years old. Small, little, I can, I smack them around. I am the toughest guy in the neighborhood. Then what happens when someone who's my size, maybe a little younger, shows up and says, "Stop it. No more." All of a sudden I'm in trouble. And you don't have anybody around Trump, with maybe the Tulsi Gabbard, maybe. But I'm not sure that he's calling her in to say, "Okay, Tulsi, tell me what you think." Trump is not gathering information from critics. He doesn't like people that are going to sit around and tell him he's wrong. He's convinced that he's certain that he's right. And so if he proceeds, if they ignore this chance to negotiate the deal with Iran, they will go down the path of this war, and it will severely damage the United States. And it's not going to bring an end to the country, but it'll bring an end to Donald Trump's presidency. Because once he gets beat in the field like that, he's not going to have anywhere to hide. And all of his fight nonsense is no, people aren't going to listen to that anymore. They're going to say, you know, you got us, you sent us into a no-win situation. That you promised peace and you brought war. I've said this, you know, for 3 months now. Trump entered office with a historic opportunity to really go down in history as the president who brought peace. He ended the threat of war in the Middle East, both in Israel and in Iran and in Yemen. He brought an end to the war in Ukraine, and he got back on the good relations with China. You know, we've been looking for an excuse to fight with China, and you know, we come up with different narratives about why they're the bad guys. So instead of being the guy who brings peace, he is bringing uncertainty and danger. There's no other way to call it.
When you look at the way that Iranian officials are talking about the talks, negotiations with the United States, they want to get a deal done as soon as possible. And we know that Russia and China are supporting Iran because they know Iranian officials talking, they don't want nuclear bombs. They don't want nuclear weapons. That's why they can get a deal as soon as possible. And we know Donald Trump is not a sort of character that wants to dragging on the talks and negotiation going on for years, and he's not interested in that as well. But what it gives us some sort of hope that the both parties are not interested in just continuing the talks without reaching any sort of outcome. But on the other hand, when I look at Ukraine and the way that Donald Trump is just behaving in Ukraine, the war that he could have ended so far, and he doesn't need to do that much to put an end to the conflict in Ukraine. In my opinion, he can just stop sending intelligence, weapons, all of that, and forcing Europeans. He's capable of forcing Europeans into a new position, but he's not doing that. That's why I'm not optimistic about what's going on between the United States and Iran.
No, I agree. He is. He doesn't even understand the causes. He understands up to a point the causes of the war in Ukraine. Certainly doesn't understand a damn thing about the Middle East. You know, when you heard him the other day that, you know, that somehow Israel gave the Palestinians Gaza, all that oceanfront property, and they made a mess of it. You know, nice fairy tale, but that's not what happened. You know, Israel's been an occupying military force for 70 years, 70 plus years. So, you know, the Palestinians have legitimate grievances. You know, the news media is not covering hardly at all the fact that Israel prevented 50,000 Christians. Yeah, they're Palestinian, but they're Christians, from going to Bethlehem and, you know, following the traditional Christian celebrations of Easter. The Jews won't let that happen. Now, if that got covered appropriately here in the United States, all of a sudden the support for Israel that's so blindly held by many of these evangelical Christians would start eroding rapidly. Israel is just, you know, it's earned a status as a pariah state. It should be, you know, in my view, treated just like South Africa was during the days of its apartheid existence, shunned by the world.
Did you see the report that says in Somalia they're preparing, United States together with Turkey, UAE, and Arab states in Somalia, they're preparing their forces there. They're a new somehow some sort of base there to attack Yemen.
Yeah, I saw that. And what you guys say, Somalia?
Yeah.
What are we doing in Somalia? I remember, good God, 35 years ago, Black Hawk Down. The U.S. went in to get ID'd, and then that turned into just a complete disaster. And the U.S. pats itself on the back because we killed, what, 10,000 Somali citizens that day, who were, a little upset that we were going in and arresting their leaders. No, how dare those Somalis not understand their position in the world? And now they're being used by the West. This sounds like Bay of Pigs too. Where you're going to launch an invading force. What are they going to do? Give them rowboats, canoes, sailboats? But they're going to go land in Yemen and start a fight there. And once they, let's say they can put together that kind of force. How the hell do they sustain the logistics? You climb out of a boat, you're carrying, let's say, 60 pounds of gear, which is ammunition. And, let's say 20 pounds of that gear is ammunition. You'll fire that. You can fire through that in 20, 30 minutes. All of a sudden, you need more ammunition. Well, where are you going to get that? That's what these people just don't understand. The logistics involved with trying to carry out sustained military operation, where you're going up against people who are fighting on their home turf. They've already got their supplies stashed. It's just madness. So that's the reason they're talking about that, is because they failed to do what they claimed that they were going to do. They failed.
And what's in it for Turkey to join in that sort of operation against Yemen?
It gets to be the biggest, baddest leader in the Middle East. Those Shia are a bunch of upstarts. The Turks are largely Sunni. So they don't want to let those Shia have any kind of victory or control. Now, Turkey again is part of the problem in the area.
Larry, one of the reasons that it seems that on the part of the United States, at least in the mainstream media, they're talking about is that there is no necessity to put an end to the conflict as soon as possible in Ukraine. And how do you think that they really feel that Russia is somehow not capable of advancing on the battlefield? And what's the reality really? What's going on the battlefield that they're feeling so comfortable? They're just sitting, just let Russia lose, let Russia be weakened. What's going on right now, in your opinion, on the battlefield?
I'm not sure I agree with your characterization. They're feeling. Who do you think's feeling comfortable?
At least the people, the establishment in the United States. I'm not talking about the Trump administration. I'm talking about those people who made this war in Ukraine, who are the main party in the conflict, who are much more powerful in Europe, and the link they have with Europe.
Well, okay, so you're basically talking the neocon crowd, the Victoria Nulands, and they're not at all comfortable. They're panicked. They're trying to figure out what they can do, what they can spin up, so that that Trump doesn't abandon the Ukrainians. That's how they're couching it. I go to my website, sonar21.com, and look at the piece I posted up last night. I list every village, city, town that the Russians have captured inside Ukraine since January of 2024. So we're now 16 months. It's not just in one area. It's all along the line of contact. They are steadily moving forward. If you do get an AI search engine and ask the question, give me the list of the towns, villages, cities inside Ukraine that the Ukrainian army has taken from the Russians and held. The answer there is none. Yeah, last August they invaded into Kursk, and initially they captured like 90 settlements. Settlement could be just a group of 5 houses clustered together, and that's called a settlement. And they, their high point, they call it the zenith of their land capture, and that operation was in September 2024. And then since then, the Russians steadily shrunk until in March they took Sudzha, and they've basically effectively driven all the rest of the Ukrainians out. And the Ukrainians lost enormous numbers of equipment and personnel. They're not in, they made some raids into Belgorod, but again, they can't go in and sustain it, hold it, and keep moving forward and pushing the Russians back. They're not doing that. You can't show me one case, not one case in the last 16 months. Yeah, they've run in, they go, hey, we planted our flag, and then, 2 weeks later, they're gone. That's not what I'm talking about. This is, the Russians, if we go back to 2022, the Russians captured Mariupol, a major city, in 6 weeks. They're still there. They haven't abandoned it. They've got Donetsk secured. And Lysychansk has been secure. You go down the list. Vuhledar. They're in the process of taking Pokrovsk. So, the Russians are making progress. And they're, in fact, the pace of their progress is increasing now. That's where you're going to see more worry, because the offensive. There was talk that they were going to be doing an offensive. And many said, "Yeah, when's it going to start?" I maintain I think it started 2 weeks ago. It's just that they're not out announcing it, but you got to look at the activity and where it's happening. 3 years ago, in let's say April of 2022, the military efforts would have been confined maybe to one sector of the battlefield. But Russia no longer has to do that. They've got a 1.5 million man army, and their logistics system is fully intact. And they're gonna continue to move and capture more and more territory. And the longer Ukraine delays, the more I think at a minimum, the Russians are going to wind up back in control of Kiev and Odessa.
I don't know why Donald Trump does feel that with Zelensky in office in Ukraine, he's going to be able to make a Ukrainian settlement with Russia. So this guy says he hates Putin, and then he said he hates all Russians. And how is that possible to talk with this guy? He's not the official president of Ukraine and making these comments.
Yeah.
He's not helping himself and nor helping Ukraine in any process of negotiations.
He should hire you as an advisor, Nima. You speak words of wisdom. No, you're right. He's just he's his own worst enemy. But and there have been more and more reports coming out about his graft, his corruption, the money he's stealing, supposedly bought a platinum mine in South Africa, buying property in the Mediterranean. So, and if he thinks, at some point he can hit the evacuation switch and leave and won't be followed and ultimately killed, I think he's kidding himself. He's going to wind up dead. I don't know if it's going to be these Ukrainian Nazis that kill him or the Russians. I think it's more likely the Ukrainian Nazis will do him in.
Here is, Larry, what Lavrov said about NATO.
Have been dissolved in the first place. After the Soviet Union ceased to exist, after the Warsaw Treaty ceased to exist, the biggest enemy of NATO is NATO itself, and those who were trying to use it to dominate in violation of their own pledges in OSCE.
It shows how serious NATO, the concept of NATO, is today for Russia.
Well, you go in and watch his full presentation there in Turkey. He said, "Look, we used to do things on a handshake basis. We didn't, because we recognized that you can spend all your time trying to put stuff down in words, but then when people break their word, you're left having to either go to war or break off relations." So he said, we put a lot of trust, and he said, we trusted the Americans. Jim Baker told us not one step east with NATO. And then we kept raising our complaints. The way the West likes to tell the story is, Russia's this imperial power. We've had to stand against it. That's why we need NATO. Russia didn't attack anybody during the 1990s. The army wasn't capable. They didn't have the military strength. The economy was in shambles. That's when they tried to join twice, once under Yeltsin's request and the other under Putin's. Then you get the West continuing to, they signed some agreements with Ukraine in, I believe it was 97, 98, and it was about military cooperation. Because, the West are the plans to destroy the Soviet Union or destroy Russia. Take all of Russia's resources, break it up, make it ours. And to that end, in 2007, I was at the Bucharest NATO summit, that Putin said, "Hey, don't do this." And then out of that, Bill Burns, I guess in 2008, said, "Hey, it's a bright red line. If you expand NATO any further west, it's Russia's going to fight back. Niet means niet." And what did we do? Well, we encouraged the Georgians with a lot of NATO support, launched that attack that led to a 2-week war with Georgia, where Russia crushed them. And then all of a sudden, man, see these Russians, man, they're trying to take over the world. And the United States is leading the charge on that, while we're, bombing the hell out of Afghans and Iraqis in 2008. And then in 2011, we're stirring up a civil war in Syria, arming, training, and equipping jihadis. We're the ones who are actually out there spreading unrest. We took out Muammar Gaddafi. After promise, hey, give up all your chemical and biological weapons, man, you'll be our best friend forever. BFFs, dude. And he was dumb enough to believe us.
I look at Ukraine. Russia tried so hard. They did everything to avoid the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Don't start this war. And they're losing it, Larry. China said, don't sanction us, don't put tariffs on us. It got the way that you're witnessing that Donald Trump just backing down on computers, on cell phones. What's the necessity of this? And the war with Iran, the same way, I would see the same sort of outcome. What is there gonna? Do you think that? I'm still hopeful about Witkov, with the case of Ukraine and Iran, and maybe with China. I don't know if is he the only rational figure in the Trump administration?
Well, let's my dear friend Pepe, on one of your last conversation with him, was excoriating Witkoff for being a real estate developer. I disagree with with Pepe. He's a lawyer, and I think he's a lawyer before he is some real estate wheeler and dealer. Because notice that with lawyers, gee, who else is a world leader that we know as a lawyer? Oh, that would be Vladimir Putin. So and you've been around some lawyers, right, Nima? They have a particular way of looking at the world, and the really good lawyers, they have a way of going, what are the facts? What is the evidence? Let's lay it out. What are the implications? What's the risk? They're always talking about managing risk. Don't create risk for yourself. How to reduce that risk. So that's why I think actually when Putin and Witkoff get together, man, they're talking. Yeah, Putin was educated in a Soviet legal system, and Witkoff in an American legal system, but the training for lawyers is somewhat similar, and so they end up having, if you will, a common language by which they can talk. And I think that's actually one of the things that helped push these talks along. So Witkoff's trying to look at it from a rational standpoint. The problem Witkoff has is when he's briefing Trump today, I'm sure, maybe briefed him yesterday. The Zionist crowd is going to rise up in outrage and try to sabotage this. And, we could wind up with the meeting getting postponed or Trump sending someone else to do the negotiation, not Witkoff. There was some accusing Witkoff already of being a puppet of Putin. He's pushing Putin talking points. So, we're going to find out. We're going to find out if Trump is serious about peace or not. Is he going to back Witkoff or not? Is he going to really? Trump needs a victory right now because things aren't going well for him in Ukraine. Things aren't going well for him with China. If he gets Iran, say, hey, Iran's not going to build a nuclear weapon. We've got the guarantees. We've got the assurances. It's not going to happen. I got us a peace deal. And most of us will then say, great, you've gone back to the JCPOA, which you canceled 5 years ago. But it's good. Glad you came around.
Anthony, did you watch Anthony Blinken's recent interview about Ukraine? He said we had differences with the government in Ukraine, but Larry, I wouldn't be surprised with the article in the Times that they're talking about. The British army, the British military was behind the counteroffensive in 2023. That failed counteroffensive.
No. That it was the U.S. That was a U.S. brainchild. The Brits. You remember there were those the kid in Massachusetts that leaked those intelligence documents back then. There were some. They already had the intelligence assessments about, when Ukraine was going to run out of air defense systems, etc. Now that was a U.S. plan. The British were part of it. Definitely had a role, but I think that was the brainchild of the United States.
And in the terms of the differences that Anthony Blinken was mentioning, he was trying to say that Donald Trump is not capable of managing the disagreements that exist between the United States and Ukraine, or he was pointing out something else. What was the main point of that sort of argument on his part?
Well, I'm not sure what the main point was. I mean, I chalk it up to political noise. Look, Blinken, Biden, Sullivan and company, along with Lloyd Austin, they made a disaster of Ukraine. And now it looks like Donald Trump is trying to one-up them, making it an even bigger mess. We'll see. He either brings it into the war, or he's faced with doubling down and expanding the war. And if he does that, Russia will win this. They are winning this. The die is cast.
I really do feel that Witkoff is capable of doing that. He's capable.
Yeah, no, he is. He's
so much. When he talks, he makes sense.
Yeah,
It makes a lot of sense.
Well, he's like I said, he's speaking like a lawyer. You know, some of I'm not sure how much of a Zionist he is. You know, does he how deeply held his religious views are? He at least he failed to meet with Hamas, but at least he met, shook hands with Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister. That's a positive sign. The Zionist crowd, though, in Washington, they don't want just a deal on the nuclear weapons is an excuse. Okay, that's all it is. It is an excuse to get rid of Iran. If Iran didn't even have a nuclear program, if they weren't even enriching uranium, they had no uranium, they'd still be demanding that they've got to give up their army, that they got to stop supporting, that they got to die. We haven't forgiven them for taking over our embassy. Good God, 46 years ago.
And they didn't forget.
Kofi, follow me.